"We did not order for your daughter," my sister announced, her voice carrying over the clinking crystal of the VIP dining room. She shoved a basket of stale dinner rolls toward my 10-year-old while her own children devoured butter-poached lobster tails. My mother took a sip of her champagne and added, "You really should have packed her a Lunchable." Kiara, stop making everyone uncomfortable with your financial struggles. I looked at my daughter, who was trying so hard not to cry. Then I looked at the family, who had treated me like a peasant. My entire life, I did not shed a tear. Instead, I smiled at the waiter and said, "Noted," when I finally stood up and dropped my titanium card on the table. I made an announcement that left my brother-in-law sweating over a declined $3,500 bill. If you have ever had your family treat you like a second-class citizen, stick around. You will want to hear exactly how I made Atlanta elite society pay for every single crumb. The crystal chandeliers at Ocean Air Prime cast a golden glow over the private dining room, illuminating the smug faces of my family. This was Buckhead, most exclusive seafood establishment, the kind of place where a reservation required either a local politician on speed dial or a corporate account that did not bounce. My mother, Valerie, had insisted on hosting our family dinner here to celebrate my brother-in-law Bradley, closing what he claimed was a massive commercial real estate deal. The waiter, a young man in a pristine white jacket, approached our table, carrying a massive silver tray. The aroma of garlic-drawn butter and fresh ocean brine filled the air. He began distributing the plates. 3 massive $185 butter-poached lobster tails were set gracefully in front of Chantel and Bradley. 3 children. The kids immediately grabbed their forks, laughing and digging into the decadent meat. Zuri, my 10-year-old daughter, sat beside me, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her eyes tracking the waiter. She was wearing her best Sunday dress, a floral piece I had ironed perfectly that morning. She had been talking about this fancy dinner all week. The waiter reached into his serving tray to place the next plate. He moved toward Zuri before he could even lower his arm. Chantel manicured hand shot across the table. Her diamond rings flashed under the chandelier as she physically intercepted the waiter's arm. "We did not pre-order for your daughter," Kiara Chantel said, her voice dripping with that specific brand of wealthy Southern condescension she had perfected over the last decade. She grabbed a small woven basket from the center of the table and slid it roughly across the white linen. The basket hit Zuri water glass, spilling a few drops. Inside were 3 cold, hard dinner rolls left over from the appetizer course. "Eat up, Zuri," Chantel smirked, leaning back in her plush velvet chair. "Lobster is a highly refined taste. You would not appreciate it anyway. Besides, someone actually has to pay for it, and we all know your mother cannot afford to split this check." I felt Zuri stiffen beside me. My intelligent, beautiful 10-year-old daughter looked down at the cold bread, her shoulders slumping. She did not say a word, but the quiet humiliation radiating from her small frame ignited a fire in my chest that had been smoldering for 34 years. Before I could even formulate a response, my mother Valerie chimed in. She adjusted her silk scarf, her eyes scanning the nearby tables to ensure no one was witnessing anything unseemly. "You really should have packed her a Lunchable." Kiara Valerie sighed, taking a delicate sip of her vintage champagne, or at least fed her before coming. "You know, Bradley is footing the bill tonight to celebrate his new firm. It is incredibly rude of you to show up expecting a free ride. Stop making everyone uncomfortable with your financial struggles. We are trying to enjoy a sophisticated evening." I took a slow, deep breath. My family had always viewed me as the ultimate failure because I refused to marry the stuffy banking executive my father had picked out for me. And because I chose to build a career in the food industry, they treated me like a peasant who had wandered into their castle. To them, I was just a broke single mother, slinging cheap food. Bradley, my white brother-in-law, chuckled loudly, wiping drawn butter from his chin with a linen napkin. He leaned across the table, his face flushed with arrogance and expensive wine. "Not all of us can sling street tacos from a rusty food truck, right?" "Kiara," he mocked, gesturing vaguely with his fork. "Some of us actually have real corporate portfolios to manage. It takes serious capital to sit at this table. You should be taking notes instead of looking so offended." Maybe if you worked half as hard as Chantel does, managing our social calendar, you could afford to buy your kid a decent meal. I looked at Bradley, a man who constantly leveraged my Black family legacy and minority status to secure corporate diversity loans for his shady real estate ventures. A man who drove a leased sports car, but secretly dodged calls from debt collectors. He thought he was untouchable. He thought I was powerless. He had absolutely no idea that the rusty food truck he was mocking had evolved into K Holdings, a multi-million-dollar luxury hospitality and real estate empire. He did not know that I was the anonymous billionaire CEO who owned the very commercial debt he was currently drowning in. And he certainly did not know that I secretly owned the building this restaurant was leasing. I did not cry. I did not scream. I did not give them the reaction they were so desperately craving. Instead, I reached over and gently pulled the basket of cold bread away from Zuri. I turned to my sister, looking directly into her smug eyes. Noted, I said simply. My calm tone seemed to unsettle Chantel. She frowned her perfectly arched eyebrows, drawing together in suspicion. But before she could open her mouth to deliver another insult, I raised my hand and snapped my fingers twice. The gesture was sharp and authoritative. Within seconds, the general manager of the restaurant, DeAndre, hurried over to our table. DeAndre was a brilliant manager who had worked for my company for 3 years. He was one of the few people in Atlanta who knew my true identity. Stopped right beside my chair, keeping his posture perfectly professional, but I could see the subtle flash of respect in his eyes. "Yes, Mom," he asked, bowing slightly. "How may I assist you this evening?" "DeAndre," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the quiet hum of the VIP dining room. "My daughter seems to have been left out of the dinner order. I would like to correct that immediately. I want you to bring her the beluga caviar tasting flight to start, followed by the gold leaf wagyu, tomahawk steak medium well, and please bring a bottle of the sparkling cider you keep reserved for the executive suite." Chantel let out a harsh, unladylike bark of laughter. She slammed her hand on the table, causing the silverware to rattle. "Are you completely insane, Kiara?" she demanded, her voice rising in panic and mock amusement. "Do you have any idea how much that costs? That caviar alone is $5,000. The steak is another $1,000. You cannot afford that on your food truck budget." Valerie leaned forward, her face twisting with embarrassment. "Kiara, stop this foolishness right now," she hissed through clenched teeth. "You are making a scene. You cannot pay for that. I will not let you bounce a maxed-out credit card and embarrass this family in front of Buckhead Elite. You are going to humiliate Bradley." I ignored my mother entirely. I kept my eyes locked on DeAndre. "Can you handle that order?" DeAndre asked smoothly. "Absolutely, madam," DeAndre replied without missing a beat. "The kitchen will prioritize your daughter's order immediately. The caviar will be brought out in 2 minutes." DeAndre turned on his heel and strode briskly toward the kitchen. Bradley scoffed loudly, shaking his head. "Let her do it, Valerie," he sneered, taking a large gulp of his wine. "When her cheap debit card declines, they will have her in the back washing dishes for the next 5 years. It will be a good lesson in reality for her. Let the street cook learn her place." Zuri tugged gently on my sleeve, her large brown eyes looking up at me with a mixture of awe and worry. "Mom, are we really getting all that?" she whispered. "Yes, baby," I whispered back, kissing her forehead. "You deserve the best, and we are done eating crumbs." Exactly 2 minutes later, a procession of waiters emerged from the kitchen. They bypassed Chantel and Bradley completely. DeAndre personally placed the mother-of-pearl spoons and the crystal dish of beluga caviar in front of Zuri. Another waiter poured the sparkling cider into a crystal flute. My family sat in stunned silence, watching my 10-year-old daughter tentatively taste caviar that cost more than their mortgage payment. Chantel's face turned a mottled shade of red. She crossed her arms, her chest heaving with indignation. "This is a pathetic stunt, Kiara," she spat. "You probably took out a payday loan just to show off. You are going to be bankrupt by tomorrow morning." I let Zuri finish her appetizer. When the massive gold leaf Wagyu tomahawk arrived shimmering under the dining room lights, the entire restaurant seemed to pause and stare. Even the wealthy patrons at the adjacent tables were whispering and pointing at the extravagant display. I waited until Zuri had taken her first bite of the tender, perfectly cooked meat. Then I slowly reached into my designer clutch. I pulled out my titanium Centurion black card. The heavy metal clinked solidly as I dropped it onto the white tablecloth right in front of Chantel. Her eyes widened as she recognized the distinctive black metal, a card that required an invite-only membership and a massive net worth to even acquire. "DeAndre," I called out. DeAndre appeared instantly at my side. "Yes, madam. Please take this card," I commanded, my voice loud enough for the neighboring tables to hear clearly. "I want you to close out the tab for every single table in this restaurant tonight. Pay for their meals, their drinks, and their desserts. Add a 30% gratuity for your excellent waitstaff." A collective gasp echoed from the nearby tables. Several patrons raised their glasses in my direction, murmuring their shocked thanks, Valerie. Mouth dropped open so wide she looked comical. Desmond, my father, who had been silently eating his lobster, suddenly choked on his food, coughing violently into his napkin. But I was not finished. I stood up, smoothing the front of my dress, and grabbed Zuri's hand. I looked down at Bradley, whose arrogant smirk had completely vanished, replaced by a look of sheer terror. "Oh, but DeAndre," I added, pausing for dramatic effect, "do not pay for this table. Mr. Bradley, here is a very successful corporate portfolio manager. He and my parents are the true elite of Atlanta. They do not need handouts from a food truck cook. Please bring them their checks separately. They will cover their own expenses tonight." DeAndre smiled a sharp, knowing smile. "Perfectly understood, madam." He took my black card and walked away. I looked at my mother, who was visibly shaking. "Thanks for the dinner invitation, Mom," I said cheerfully. "Next time, try not to choke on your own pride." I turned and walked out of the VIP room with Zuri skipping happily beside me, holding her leftover Wagyu in a beautiful gold-embossed takeout bag. I did not look back, but I did not need to. I knew exactly what was about to happen. As the heavy mahogany doors of the VIP room swung shut behind me, I heard the unmistakable sequence of events unfold. The waiter approached their table and placed a black leather folder in front of Bradley. Inside was the bill for their extravagant feast, $3,500. Bradley, sweating profusely, pulled out his supposedly limitless corporate credit card and handed it to the waiter. A minute of tense silence passed inside that room. Then the loud, distinct beep of the credit card machine echoed through the space. "I'm sorry, sir," the waiter's polite but firm voice carried through the door. "Your card has been declined," Bradley sputtered, his voice cracking. "Declined. That is impossible. Run it again. Run it again right now." "I ran it 3 times, sir," the waiter replied. "The terminal states, the transaction is declined due to exceeding the maximum credit limit." "Do you have another form of payment, sir?" Chantel shrieked. Bradley. "What does he mean?" "Declined. Pay the bill." People are staring. Valerie began to hyperventilate, fanning herself with her napkin. "Desmond, check your wallet. Give him your card." Desmond groaned, his voice filled with panic. "Valerie, I left my wallet in the car. I thought Bradley was paying." The glorious symphony of their public humiliation was music to my ears. I handed my parking ticket to the valet, stepped into the cool Atlanta night air, and smiled. My family thought they could treat me like garbage and walk away clean. They thought they held all the power. They had no idea that I had just pulled the pin on a grenade that was going to blow their fake wealthy lives into a million irreparable pieces. This was only the appetizer. The main course was going to be so much sweeter. I pulled my reliable mid-sized sport utility vehicle out of the restaurant parking lot, leaving the chaos of Buckhead behind me. My family always mocked this car, calling it a delivery van, but it was the perfect cover for the life I actually lived. Zuri sat in the passenger seat, humming quietly to the radio, while clutching her gold-embossed takeout bag like it was a treasure chest. "Mom, that was the best steak I have ever had in my entire life," she said, her eyes heavy with sleep but sparkling with joy. "You are the best mom ever." Her sweet voice melted away. Any residual anger I felt from the dinner, I reached over and squeezed her hand, telling her that she deserved every good thing in this world, and that I would never let anyone treat her like an afterthought again. We merged onto the main road as the city lights reflected off the windshield. Everything felt calm for exactly 10 minutes. Then my phone connected to the car audio system began to ring. The dashboard screen lit up with a barrage of notifications from our family group chat. The chat was ironically named Family First, but tonight it was an active war zone. The notifications came in so fast, they sounded like a continuous alarm bell. I asked the voice assistant to read the messages aloud. My mother Valerie had sent a barrage of texts. Her words filled the quiet cabin of my car, radiating pure venom. Kiara, you are a spiteful, jealous little girl, she wrote. You planned this entire stunt just to embarrass your sister. You could not handle the fact that Chantel married a successful businessman while you are still single and struggling to keep a food truck afloat. Do you have any idea what you just did? Bradley had a potential investor sitting 2 tables away, a man who was going to write a check for his next commercial project. That man watched my son-in-law get humiliated by a declined card over a seafood dinner. You ruined a multi-million-dollar deal tonight because you wanted to play rich for 5 minutes. You are a disgrace to this family. Then came the messages from Chantel. My sister was spiraling into a total narcissistic meltdown. You are dead to me. Kiara, she typed. I am blocking you from my life. You made my children watch their father get humiliated by the waitstaff. I had to leave my diamond watch as collateral while Bradley called his bank. Do you know how embarrassing that is? The valet staff was laughing at us. You are nothing but a bitter street cook, and you will die. Broke and alone. I listened to the voice assistant read these toxic messages in its flat, robotic tone, which only made the absurdity of their entitlement more hilarious. They were furious that they actually had to pay for their own expensive food. They expected me, the daughter. They constantly belittled to quietly endure their insults while footing their massive bill. I did not respond. I simply kept my eyes on the road, letting them expose their true nature in the group chat. Suddenly, the group chat notifications stopped and an incoming call took over the screen. It was Bradley. I debated ignoring it, but I wanted to hear exactly what this arrogant man had to say. I tapped the answer button on my steering wheel. Before I could even say hello, Bradley exploded through the car speakers. He was screaming so loudly that Zuri jumped in her seat. You stupid, broke piece of trash! Bradley yelled, his voice shaking with absolute rage. Do you have any idea what you just did to me? I just had to beg the restaurant manager to let me wire the funds tomorrow morning. I had to leave my watch at the front desk. You set me up. You told that manager to decline my card. I kept my voice completely level, brushing off his anger like dust on my shoulder. I did not touch your card, Bradley, I replied calmly. I paid for the entire restaurant. Your card declined because you do not have any money. It is not my fault you ordered $3,000 worth of seafood on a maxed-out credit line. Do not play games with me, you food truck failure, he spat back. You just cost me a $10 million investment. The man sitting next to us was going to fund my new real estate project. He walked out when the waiter announced my card was declined. You ruined my life tonight and you are going to pay for it. I am calling my lawyers in the morning. I am suing you for intentional interference with a business contract. I am going to take that pathetic little taco stand you call a business, and I am going to liquidate it to pay for my lost commission. I let out a slow, dry laugh. Bradley, your threats are as empty as your bank account, I said. You cannot sue me for paying my own bill. And let us be very clear about how you do business. You are a white man who married a black woman just so you could slap her family name on your business profile and secure minority, business development loans. You use my parents' legacy to get corporate grants meant for marginalized communities, and you still manage to run your companies into the ground. You are a fraud. Bradley, a broke, desperate fraud, and everyone in Atlanta is about to find out. He went completely silent for a moment, shocked that the usually quiet sister-in-law was standing up to him. You are going to regret this, Kiara. He finally hissed, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. You have no idea what you just started. I am going to take everything you have. I ended the call, leaving his empty threats hanging in the digital void. I glanced at Zuri, who was staring at me with wide eyes. I smiled at her and turned the music back on, smoothing over the tension. I felt completely at peace, letting him throw his little temper tantrum. He thought he could intimidate me into covering his tracks. He thought I was just a vulnerable target. He could bully. We were about 5 minutes away from home, cruising through a quiet residential neighborhood. I was mentally planning my schedule for the next day, preparing to review the quarterly earnings for my hospitality group. The quiet was broken by one final chime from my phone. It was another message in the family group chat from my mother. I figured it was just another insult, another complaint about how I had ruined their pristine social standing. I asked the car assistant to read the new message. What the automated voice read next made the blood freeze in my veins and the air leave my lungs. The message said, "Chantel, tell Bradley to calm down and stop threatening her right now. She is going to get suspicious. Let him talk to his lawyers tomorrow, but he needs to keep his mouth shut tonight. She still does not know that we forged her signature last year to use her name as the primary guarantor for Bradley, $4 million commercial loan. If she gets angry and checks her credit report before the bank finalizes the foreclosure, she will realize we tied her food truck business and her social security number to his toxic debt. Just let the bank seize her little business when Bradley Company goes under. It will cover the interest and keep them away from our house. We need her to stay oblivious until the paperwork clears." I slammed my foot on the brakes. The heavy vehicle screeched to a halt in the middle of the empty street, the tires protesting violently against the asphalt. Zuri jolted forward, caught safely by her seatbelt. "Mom, what is wrong?" she asked, her voice trembling. I could not speak. I could barely breathe. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I stared at the dashboard screen where my mother's message was still displayed. She had meant to send that text privately to Chantel. In her blind rage and panic over the ruined dinner, she had accidentally dropped it into the main family chat where I could see it. My own parents. The people who brought me into this world had forged my signature. They had stolen my identity to co-sign a massive $4 million loan for a son-in-law who openly despised me. They had actively planned to let the bank destroy my life, seize my supposed small business and ruin my financial future, just to protect their own house and Bradley failing company. They had served me up as a sacrificial lamb for a man who could not even afford to buy his own dinner. I pulled the car over to the side of the road and put it in park. I picked up my phone and took 5 different screenshots of the message, making sure the timestamps and sender identity were clearly captured. I backed up the images to 3 different secure cloud servers. A cold, calculating silence washed over my brain. The sadness was completely gone. The hurt of being the unloved daughter vanished, leaving behind a terrifying absolute clarity. They did not just view me as a failure, they viewed me as collateral damage. I looked at Zuri, who was still watching me with concern. I forced a soft, reassuring smile onto my face. "Everything is perfectly fine, baby," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "Mommy just realized she needs to make a very important phone call tomorrow morning. We are going to build a new castle, and some people are going to have to lose theirs." I put the car back into drive and headed toward our house. My family thought they had trapped a helpless street cook in a mountain of inescapable debt. They thought they were playing chess with a pawn. They had absolutely no idea they had just handed a loaded weapon to the anonymous billionaire who already owned the board. Tomorrow I was not going to cry. Tomorrow I was going to war. The morning sun crept over the Atlanta skyline, casting long shadows across the pavement as I pulled up to the drop-off zone at Zuri's school. She kissed my cheek and hopped out of the car, her heavy backpack bouncing against her shoulders as she ran to meet her friends. I watched her go, feeling a fierce protective instinct burning in my chest. The innocent smile on her face was the only thing keeping me grounded after the devastating revelation of the previous night. My own parents had sold me out. They had offered my financial future on a silver platter to a man who despised us both. I shifted the car into gear and headed downtown toward the financial district. The anger I felt was not the loud, chaotic type. It was a cold, calculating fury that sharpened my focus and slowed my heartbeat. I parked my reliable delivery vehicle in the underground garage of the towering glass skyscraper that housed one of the most ruthless law firms in the state. I rode the elevator up to the top floor, the plush carpet silencing my footsteps as I walked past the receptionist and directly into the corner office of my lead attorney, Camille. Camille was a force of nature, a brilliantly sharp woman who had helped me build my hospitality empire from the ground up. She looked up from her mahogany desk, sensing immediately that this was not a routine quarterly review. I sat down in the leather chair opposite her and placed my phone on the desk. I need a complete forensic sweep of my entire financial and legal history, going back at least 5 years. I told her, my voice devoid of any emotion. Everything connected to my social security number, every credit inquiry, every property deed, every corporate registry. Leave no stone unturned. Camille did not ask questions. She saw the rigid set of my jaw and immediately began typing furiously on her dual monitors. The silence in the office was thick, broken only by the rapid clicking of her keyboard. I sat perfectly still, watching the Atlanta traffic far below us, like tiny toy cars. My mind reeled with the implications of my mother's accidental text message. How deep did this betrayal go? How much of my identity had they compromised? For 34 years, I had played the role of the dutiful but disappointing daughter. I had let them look down on my food truck business, letting them believe I was barely scraping by just to maintain some semblance of peace. I had hidden my massive wealth and my corporate acquisitions because I knew their greed would ruin whatever fragile bond we had left. But they had bypassed my boundaries entirely. They had gone behind my back and stolen my name. The clicking of Camille's keyboard suddenly stopped. She stared at her screen, her eyes widening in genuine shock. "Kiara, we have a massive problem," Camille said, her professional composure slipping for a fraction of a second. She turned one of the large monitors toward me, pointing at a series of complex banking documents. What I saw made the blood rush in my ears. 2 years ago, my parents, Valerie and Desmond, had quietly approached a mid-tier commercial bank. They presented documents bearing my forged signature, establishing me as the primary guarantor for a massive high-risk commercial real estate loan. The loan was for $4 million, and it was issued directly to Bradley Failing Property Development Company. They used my spotless credit history, which I had meticulously maintained over the years, to secure a loan that Bradley never could have gotten on his own. But that was not the worst part. Camille pulled up another set of documents. The real estate market shifted. Bradley made terrible investments, and his company has been hemorrhaging money for the past 18 months. He has completely defaulted on the loan. Camille explained, her voice tight with urgency. The bank is preparing to initiate aggressive collection procedures. Because my parents used their own house as collateral alongside my forged signature, the bank is currently drafting the paperwork to seize Valerie and Desmond mortgaged home. Furthermore, federal investigators are already sniffing around Bradley corporate accounts because he has been misappropriating funds meant for minority business development. He is facing imminent federal fraud charges unless he finds a buyer to bail out his sinking company and pay off this $4 million debt immediately. The sheer audacity of their plan left me temporarily speechless. They had literally bet their own home and my entire financial existence on Bradley, incompetent business skills. My father, Desmond, the man who spent his days polishing his golf clubs and bragging about his elite country club status, had signed away my future. My mother, Valerie, who obsessed over her social standing at charity galas, had willingly sacrificed her own daughter to save face for her white son-in-law. They viewed me as nothing more than a human shield, a disposable asset they could use to absorb the impact of Bradley failure. It all made perfect sense now. Their constant demands for me to sell my food truck, their obsession with Bradley's supposed wealth, their panic at the restaurant when I ordered the expensive food. They were terrified that I would trigger a credit check and discover the $4 million anchor they had tied around my neck. They were actively trying to keep me poor and oblivious so that when the bank finally came knocking, they could let my business take the fall while they scrambled to protect their own assets. The betrayal was so absolute, so deeply rooted in malice, that it eradicated any lingering trace of familial loyalty I might have harbored. I looked at the forged signatures on the screen, studying the careless loops of ink that were meant to represent my consent. They had not even tried to mimic my handwriting accurately. They simply assumed I would never find out until it was too late. This is criminal identity theft, Camille stated, leaning forward and clasping her hands together. We need to go to the police immediately. Kiara, I can have federal marshals at your parents' house by noon. Bradley will be arrested for wire fraud, and your parents will face severe felony charges for the forgery. We can freeze the assets and protect your credit before the bank makes its move. She was ready for war, prepared to unleash the full force of the legal system upon them. I stared out the window, watching the clouds gather over the city. I imagined my parents in handcuffs, Bradley weeping in a courtroom, Chantel screaming about how unfair it all was. It would be justice, certainly, but it felt too clean, too easy. Going to the police meant handing over the punishment to a judge. It meant letting them hide behind lawyers and plea deals. I did not want them to just go to jail. I wanted them to feel the exact same terror and helplessness they had tried to inflict on me. I wanted to strip away every single thing they valued in this world, until they had nothing left but the crushing weight of their own arrogance. No police, I said softly, turning back to Camille. Jail is far too easy for what they have done. I want to own them. I want to own every aspect of their miserable lives. Camille raised an eyebrow, waiting for my instructions. I leaned across the desk, outlining the strategy that had just crystallized in my mind. I want you to use K Holdings, my primary shell corporation, I instructed. Contact the bank holding. Bradley Distressed Commercial Loan. Tell them K Holdings wants to purchase the entire $4 million debt portfolio immediately. We will pay in pure cash, no financing needed. Banks are always eager to offload toxic commercial debt, especially when it is backed by a defaulting company. They will gladly take a cash buyout to wipe the liability from their books. Once K Holdings owns the debt we officially own, Bradley Company. We also own the lien on my parents' house, which they used as collateral. I want to become their absolute master. I want to be the anonymous billionaire they are praying will save them. Camille smiled, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across her face. It was the smile of a predator recognizing a flawless hunt. She immediately understood the magnitude of what I was proposing. By purchasing the debt, I would not just save my own credit score, I would legally become the dictator of their financial destiny. I would have the power to liquidate Bradley Company, fire him from his own board, and foreclose on the very house my parents loved more than their own daughter. Camille picked up her phone and began dialing her banking contacts, routing the calls through our secure corporate channels. The process of buying commercial debt usually took weeks, but when you leverage the massive liquid capital of an entity like K Holdings, bureaucratic red tape tends to vanish. We spent the next 3 hours transferring funds, signing non-disclosure agreements, and executing the acquisition through various anonymous corporate veils. I sat in the office reviewing the final contracts, ensuring that my name was buried so deeply beneath layers of corporate legalities that Bradley and my parents would never be able to trace the purchase back to me. The bank executives were thrilled to rid themselves of the bad debt, processing the transaction with unprecedented speed. By early afternoon, it was done. The digital signatures were verified. The wire transfers cleared the Federal Reserve, and K Holdings became the sole owner of Bradley's entire corporate existence and my parents' residential mortgage. I held the printed confirmation in my hand, feeling the heavy, satisfying weight of absolute power. I thanked Camille, who was already drafting the foreclosure contingency notices, and left the glass skyscraper. The Atlanta heat hit me as I walked back to my car, but I felt entirely cold inside. The victim they had tried to sacrifice had just purchased the slaughterhouse. I navigated the heavy afternoon traffic heading back toward the suburbs. The radio was off, the silence in the car, allowing me to map out the next phase of my retaliation. My phone, resting in the center console, suddenly lit up with a notification. The family group chat was active again. I let the automated voice assistant read the messages aloud as I merged onto the highway. It was a message from Bradley sent with an absurd amount of exclamation points. The automated voice read, "God is good and anonymous billionaire from K Holdings just bought my debt. We are saved. The bank just notified me that my loans were purchased in full. I told you my business model was brilliant. This is the bailout we needed. We are back on top, baby." My mother immediately responded in the chat. Oh, praise the Lord, Bradley. I knew your genius would attract the right investors. We are finally free from that terrible bank. Chantel chimed in. Next, her vanity entirely restored. We have to celebrate Bradley the Elite, HBCU. Alumni Gala is next week. All the top investors and politicians will be there. The K Holdings executives will definitely be there to reveal themselves and celebrate our partnership. This is our moment to shine. The sheer delusion of their messages was almost intoxicating. They truly believed that some benevolent, wealthy savior had looked at Bradley's disastrous, failing company and decided to rescue them out of the goodness of their hearts. They thought they had escaped the consequences of their fraud. They thought the upcoming gala, the most prestigious social event in the Atlanta Black elite calendar, would be their crowning achievement. The gala was legendary, known for its red carpets, exclusive guest lists, and billionaire attendees. Chantel had been boasting about getting tickets for months, using it to solidify her fake wealthy persona. They were planning to walk into that ballroom like royalty, believing they had secured their place among the elite. My phone chimed one more time. Another message from Bradley, directed specifically at me. The voice assistant read the text. Kiara, I know you are probably seething with jealousy right now, but do not even think about showing up to the Elite HBCU Alumni Gala. Next week, you do not have a ticket, and security will throw you out if you try to show up in your cheap food truck clothes. Stay home and leave the corporate networking to the real professionals. I pulled my car into my driveway, turning off the engine. I sat in the quiet cabin staring at his pathetic, arrogant message. He wanted me to feel small. He wanted me to cower in the shadows while he paraded around on funds he had stolen using my name. He wanted me to stay away from the very event where he planned to worship his anonymous billionaire savior. I picked up my phone, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. I did not write a long, angry paragraph. I did not defend my wardrobe or my business. Simply typed a single sentence that carried the weight of their impending doom. I typed I would not miss it for the world. I hit send and watched the message appear in the group chat. Then I locked my phone and walked into my house tomorrow. I had a gala to prepare for and a dress to buy. The preparations for the gala would need to be meticulous. I walked into my home office and powered on my encrypted laptop. I needed to ensure that my arrival at the Botanical Gardens would be flawlessly executed. My executive assistant had already secured a private VIP table near the front of the stage, under the K Holdings corporate banner, but I needed to make sure my family remained completely blind to the trap they were walking into. I reviewed the guest list for the alumni event, noting the politicians, real estate developers, and media personalities who would be in attendance. This was not going to be a private family argument in a living room. This was going to be a highly publicized execution of their social standing. Every person my mother had ever tried to impress, every country club associate. My father bragged to every fake friend Chantel competed with. They would all be in that ballroom wearing their finest evening gowns and tailored tuxedos, watching the complete destruction of Bradley fraudulent empire. I opened a secure email channel to DeAndre, the restaurant manager, who had witnessed their humiliation the night before. I instructed him to coordinate with the gala catering team, ensuring that K Holdings was recognized as the primary platinum sponsor of the entire evening. I wanted my corporate logo projected on every screen, printed on every menu, and etched into the minds of every guest in attendance. I wanted Bradley to spend the entire night worshiping the very entity that was about to swallow him whole. The irony was thick and delicious. I spent the rest of the evening cooking dinner for Zuri, listening to her talk about her school day, completely insulated from the financial warfare happening just beneath the surface of our lives. She was the reason I had built this empire, and she was the reason I was going to tear theirs down. They had tried to steal her future to fund their vanity, and for that crime there could be no forgiveness, no reconciliation, and absolutely no mercy. I kissed her goodnight, tucked her into bed, and returned to my office. The glow of the computer screen illuminated the forged loan documents Camille had sent over. I traced the fake signature with my finger, a physical manifestation of their betrayal. They had built a house of cards on top of a landmine, And next week, at the most prestigious event of the year, I was going to be the one to light the match. The morning after I sent that text message to the family group chat, my phone rang with a number I had not seen on my screen in weeks. It was my father Desmond calling me at 9 in the morning, which meant he was already on the golf course. I stared at the dashboard display of my car, considering whether I should let it go to voicemail. But the strategic part of my mind knew I needed to gather as much intelligence as possible before the gala. I pressed the answer button on my steering wheel and his gruff, authoritative voice filled the cabin of my car. He did not ask how I was doing or if Zuri had enjoyed her dinner the night before. Instead, he immediately launched into a commanding tone, telling me that he needed to see me at the Oakmont Heritage Golf Club at noon sharp. He said it was a matter of urgent family business and told me not to be late before abruptly ending the call. I kept my hands steady on the steering wheel, feeling that familiar cold fury bubbling up in my chest. Oakmont Heritage was his absolute pride and joy, an exclusive sprawling country club that catered to the upper echelons of Atlanta society. He spent every single day there, smoking expensive cigars, drinking premium bourbon, and pretending to be a self-made titan of industry, when in reality, he was a hollow man living off credit cards and the false promises of his white son-in-law Bradley. I went home and changed my clothes, choosing my wardrobe with meticulous care. I did not wear the designer labels I could easily afford. I dressed exactly how they expected me to dress in clean but modest clothing, wearing a simple cotton blouse and dark slacks, looking every bit the struggling food truck owner they believed me to be. I drove my reliable mid-size vehicle to the wrought iron gates of the country club, watching the security guard sneer slightly at my car before checking my name against the guest list. He reluctantly pressed the button to open the heavy gates, directing me to park in the overflow lot, far away from the gleaming sports cars and luxury sedans that lined the main entrance. I walked up the winding cobblestone path toward the grand clubhouse, listening to the distant sound of golf clubs, striking balls, and the low hum of wealthy patrons networking over lunch. This was a world my father believed he owned, a world he constantly threw in my face to remind me of my supposed failures. I stepped onto the sprawling outdoor patio, which overlooked the 18th hole. The air smelled of freshly cut grass and expensive tobacco. I spotted Desmond immediately holding court at a large wrought iron table surrounded by three other older men who were laughing loudly at a joke he had just told. He was wearing crisp white golf attire, a heavy gold watch gleaming on his wrist, and a premium cigar clamped between his teeth. As I approached the table, he saw me and his smile instantly vanished, replaced by a look of profound annoyance. He muttered an excuse to his friends, acting as if my very presence was a burden he was forced to endure. He stood up and guided me to a secluded table in the far corner of the patio, away from the prying eyes of his country club associates. He sat down heavily across from me, not bothering to offer me a menu or ask if I wanted something to drink. He just looked at me with that same expression of deep disappointment I had been subjected to for 34 years. "You have been causing a lot of unnecessary drama lately, Kiara." My father began taking a slow drag from his cigar and blowing the smoke into the warm afternoon air. "Your mother is beside herself after that little stunt you pulled at the restaurant last night. Embarrassing your brother-in-law like that in front of important people was a remarkably selfish thing to do, even for you." I sat perfectly still, keeping my face completely devoid of emotion. And I did not defend myself or mention that Bradley was the one who had tried to humiliate my 10-year-old daughter. I simply waited, knowing that narcissists always reveal their true intentions when you let them talk into the silence. Desmond leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, and pulled a thick manila folder from his leather briefcase. He slid it across the glass surface until it bumped against my hands. "Your mother and I have been talking," he continued, his voice taking on a patronizing tone that made my skin crawl. "We know you have been struggling financially with that little food cart of yours. It pains us to see you living like a peasant when you come from a family of our stature. You were always too stubborn. Kiara, if you had just married that bank teller I picked out for you, instead of trying to be a chef, you would not be begging for scraps today. You would have a stable life and a husband who could provide for you, but you always had to do things the hard way. Now you are a single mother trying to sell tacos on the street corner, and it is reflecting poorly on the family name. He tapped his manicured fingernail against the manila folder. But because we are your parents, we are willing to throw you a lifeline. We had Bradley corporate lawyers draft up a retroactive family business agreement. Sign this document today, and I will personally write you a check to pay your rent for a month. We will officially bring your little food business under Bradley corporate umbrella to give you some legitimacy. It is a generous offer. Kiara, take it and stop making everything so difficult. I looked down at the manila folder, then back up at the man who had supposedly raised me. He looked so incredibly smug, completely convinced that he was playing the role of the benevolent patriarch, throwing a few crumbs to his starving daughter. I opened the folder and pulled out the crisp white pages. The legal jargon was dense, designed to confuse anyone without a background in corporate law. But my attorneys had trained me well over the last decade. As my eyes scanned the paragraphs, my blood turned to ice. The document was a masterpiece of malicious intent. It was not a business umbrella agreement. It was a complete transfer of financial liability. The contract explicitly stated that my company would retroactively absorb the debt obligations of Bradley failing real estate firm. It included hidden clauses that confirmed I was the willing primary guarantor for the $4 million commercial loan, actively acknowledging the forged signature they had submitted to the bank 2 years prior. If I signed this piece of paper, I would be voluntarily confessing to a multi-million-dollar fraud and legally absolving my parents and Bradley of any criminal wrongdoing. They were trying to trick me into putting my own head on the chopping block to save theirs. The sheer evil of their plan was almost breathtaking. They had summoned me here to this beautiful sunlit country club patio to calmly orchestrate my total destruction. Desmond sat there puffing his cigar, waiting for me to blindly sign away my freedom for the promise of 1 month of rent money. He thought I was desperate enough and stupid enough to fall into his trap. I slowly aligned the edges of the papers, slipped them back into the manila folder, and pushed it back across the table. I kept my posture relaxed, leaning back in my chair and crossing my arms over my chest. "I am not signing this," I said, my voice steady and cold. Desmond froze the cigar, halting halfway to his mouth. His eyes narrowed, and the fake benevolence vanished instantly, replaced by a simmering rage. "What did you just say?" he demanded, leaning across the table aggressively. I said, "I am not signing your fraudulent trap," I replied, maintaining direct eye contact. "I am not going to absorb Bradley $4 million toxic debt, and I am certainly not going to legally validate the forged documents you and Mom submitted to the bank 2 years ago. I know everything. Desmond, I know about the loan. I know about the imminent foreclosure on your house, and I know that Bradley is days away from facing federal fraud charges. You cannot use me as your scapegoat anymore." The color completely drained from his face. His jaw dropped slightly, and for a few seconds he looked like he was suffocating. He had not expected me to know the truth. He had assumed I was too uneducated to understand corporate finance, but his shock quickly morphed into explosive anger. His fragile ego could not handle being exposed and outsmarted by the daughter he viewed as worthless. He slammed his fist down on the glass table, causing nearby patrons to turn and stare at our corner. "How dare you speak to me that way?" he hissed, his voice trembling with fury. "You are an ungrateful, wretched girl. We gave you life. We gave you a name. You are nothing without this family. You are going to sign that paper right now, or I swear to God, I will make sure you never work in this city again. I will have your food truck impounded. I will call Child Protective Services on you. I will destroy you, Kiara." I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I just sat there watching a weak, desperate man throw a temper tantrum because his elaborate house of cards was collapsing. "I do not think you have the power to destroy anyone anymore, Desmond," I said softly. "You cannot even pay for your own golf membership." Desmond's face turned a dangerous shade of purple. He stood up abruptly, knocking his chair backward, scraping loudly against the stone patio. I was trembling with humiliation, realizing that his wealthy friends were watching him lose control. "Oh, you are done," he shouted, pointing a shaking finger at my face. "I am having you thrown out of here right now." He snapped his fingers loudly and aggressively in the air, gesturing frantically toward the main clubhouse. "Clubhouse manager," he yelled. "Get out here, Sterling, get out here now." Within moments, the general manager of the country club hurried out onto the patio. Sterling was a dignified older gentleman who had managed Oakmont Heritage for over 20 years, keeping the secrets of Atlanta elite while maintaining immaculate service standards. He approached our table looking deeply uncomfortable, holding a sleek digital tablet in his hands. "Yes," Mr. Desmond Sterling said, keeping his voice low and discreet, attempting to de-escalate the very public scene. "Sterling, I want this woman escorted off the premises immediately," Desmond commanded, puffing his chest out to reassert his dominance. "She is harassing a club member, and she is no longer welcome here. Call security and have her thrown out the front gates." I did not move. I simply looked up at Sterling and offered a polite smile. The older manager looked at the tablet in his hands, then looked at Desmond. He did not signal for security. He did not reach for my arm. Instead, his expression softened into a look of profound, absolute pity. It was the kind of look you give a man standing on the train tracks who does not realize the express train is right behind him. "Mr. Desmond, I cannot do that," Sterling said, his voice steady, but carrying a heavy weight of finality. Desmond blinked, visibly confused by the insubordination. "What do you mean you cannot do that? I am a premium platinum member of this club. This club, I pay your salary, do as I say." Sterling shook his head slowly. "Sir, I cannot remove this woman from the premises because as of 3 days ago, K Holdings purchased the entire land estate that this golf course and the surrounding country club sits on." He looked at me respectfully, acknowledging my true identity. "Ms. Kiara is the anonymous CEO of K Holdings. She is our new landlord. She owns this entire property." The silence that fell over the patio was deafening. Several of Desmond's wealthy friends, who had been eavesdropping on the commotion, stared at me with wide eyes. Desmond stood completely paralyzed. The cigar slipped from his trembling fingers, tumbling down his crisp white golf shirt and landing on the stone floor. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He looked from Sterling to me, his reality completely fracturing. Furthermore, Mr. Desmond Sterling continued mercilessly, reading directly from his tablet. "I was actually on my way to find you before this incident. Your membership at Oakmont Heritage has been officially suspended effective immediately due to $45,000 in unpaid monthly dues. It appears the corporate account Mr. Bradley was using to cover your expenses has been completely frozen by the bank. You will need to clear your locker and vacate the premises." Desmond physically reeled backward, as if he had been struck in the chest by a sledgehammer. He stumbled, grasping the edge of the glass table to keep from collapsing. His breathing became rapid and shallow, his chest heaving as the crushing weight of his public humiliation settled over him. The elite status he had worshipped, the fake wealth he had flaunted, the superiority he had wielded like a weapon against me. It was all gone, obliterated in front of the very men he desperately wanted to impress. He was suddenly just an old broke fraud who had tried to sacrifice his own daughter to save his pride. I stood up slowly, smoothing the front of my simple cotton blouse. I picked up my purse and looked down at the man clutching his chest, struggling to breathe. "Do not worry about the rent check, Desmond," I said, my voice echoing clearly across the silent patio. "I think you are going to need it to pay for your moving boxes. I hear Chantel apartment has a very comfortable couch." I turned my back on him and walked gracefully across the patio, the sound of my sensible shoes clicking against the stone. Every eye in the country club followed me, a silent wave of respect parting the crowd as the new landlord exited her property. I walked down the cobblestone path toward the overflow lot, hopped into my reliable mid-size vehicle, and drove through the front gates, feeling the sweet warm breeze of absolute freedom. Tomorrow night was the alumni gala, and the main event was finally ready to begin. The fallout from the country club incident was immediate and wildly predictable. By the time I had driven back to my corporate office, my phone was already lighting up with a new strategy from the women of my family. My mother Valerie and my sister Chantel had realized that brute force and intimidation were no longer working against me. Their golden goose was slipping away, and the reality of Bradley facing federal fraud charges was closing in on them like a tightening noose. They shifted their tactics from aggressive demands to sickeningly sweet manipulation. I received an elaborate digital invitation, inviting me to an intimate afternoon tea at my parents' sprawling suburban estate. The message from Chantel claimed that tensions had simply run too high, and that as women of the family, we needed to sit down and heal our generational divides. It was a beautifully crafted lie designed to lure me back into their territory, where they felt they held all the power. I accepted the invitation knowing exactly what kind of ambush they were planning. I spent the entire morning reviewing the final property deeds with Camille, ensuring that the legal transfer of my parents' mortgaged home to my holding company was completely ironclad. When the afternoon arrived, I dressed carefully for the occasion. I chose a simple beige sundress that looked modest but elegant, and I pinned a delicate diamond and pearl brooch to my collar. I drove my inconspicuous car through the manicured streets of their affluent Atlanta neighborhood, pulling up to the massive brick house that had always been a symbol of their fake superiority. I parked in the circular driveway, taking a long moment to look at the towering white columns and the perfectly trimmed hedges. My mother loved this house more than she loved her own children. She hosted exclusive charity events and garden parties here, using the property to secure her status among the local high society. She had absolutely no idea that the ground she was standing on no longer belonged to her. I walked up the sweeping stone steps and rang the heavy brass doorbell, feeling a strange sense of anticipation for the psychological warfare that was about to unfold. Chantel opened the door wearing a designer wrap dress and a smile so incredibly fake it barely reached her eyes. She ushered me inside with exaggerated warmth, offering to take my purse and asking about the drive over in my little delivery car. The grand foyer smelled of expensive floral arrangements and lemon wood polish, just as it always had. My mother Valerie glided out of the formal living room holding a heavy silver tray loaded with cucumber sandwiches and imported teas. She was putting on this performance of a lifetime, speaking in soft, gentle tones about how much she missed our family harmony. They guided me into the formal sitting room, a pristine space filled with antique furniture, expensive Persian rugs, and a massive glass china cabinet that held generations of expensive porcelain heirlooms. I sat down on the plush velvet sofa, keeping my posture relaxed while my eyes tracked their every movement. Valerie poured the tea with slightly shaking hands, betraying the deep panic she was desperately trying to hide beneath her polite facade. They spent the first 20 minutes making empty small talk, complimenting my dress, and asking vague, condescending questions about my food truck business. They acted as though I had not just humiliated our father at his exclusive golf club 24 hours prior. I played along smoothly, sipping the warm chamomile tea and giving them nothing but polite, pleasant smiles. I watched Chantel nervously tap her perfectly manicured fingernails against the edge of her porcelain teacup, waiting for the right moment to spring their trap. They were treating me like a naive child, hoping to soften my defenses with cucumber sandwiches and fake maternal affection. It was deeply insulting how stupid they thought I was. After the tea had been poured and the pleasantries finally exhausted, the atmosphere in the room suddenly shifted. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees and the fake smiles melted away, leaving behind the cold, desperate faces of two women backed into a dangerous corner. Valerie set her teacup down on the silver tray with a sharp clink that echoed in the quiet room. She let out a heavy, dramatic sigh and leaned forward, resting her hands on her knees. "Kiara, we need to talk about the reality of our family situation," she began, her voice dropping its sweet melody and taking on a sharp, commanding edge. "Your father was very upset yesterday, but he was only acting out of concern for your well-being. We all know you are struggling to keep your little street food business afloat, and we know the burden of being a single mother is weighing heavily on you." Chantel reached into her oversized designer tote bag and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents, sliding them smoothly across the polished mahogany coffee table until they rested right in front of me. The documents were identical to the ones Desmond had tried to force on me at the country club. It was a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement, coupled with a total transfer of financial liability. They wanted me to officially absorb the $4 million toxic debt that Bradley had accumulated through his fraudulent real estate ventures. They wanted me to formally validate the forged signatures they had submitted to the bank, saving them from federal prison and total financial ruin. "We are giving you a chance to be part of this family again," Chantel said, her tone dripping with toxic venom. "You are going to sign these papers today, Kiara. You are going to take responsibility for this corporate loan, and we will make sure you get a small monthly stipend to keep your little taco cart running. It is a win-win situation for everyone. You get steady pocket money, and the family legacy remains untarnished." I looked down at the thick stack of documents and then back up at my sister. "You forge my name to steal millions of dollars for your husband, and you call it a family legacy?" I asked, my voice perfectly calm and devoid of any intimidation. Valerie narrowed her eyes into dark, angry slits. "Do not use that word in my house," she snapped, her true colors finally showing. "We did what we had to do to protect our wealth and our standing in this community. You have never contributed anything of value to this family, and it is time you pulled your weight. Sign the papers, Kiara, and we can put all this ugliness behind us." I did not reach for the pen they had placed on the table. I simply sat back against the velvet cushions and looked at them with a mild expression of boredom. "I am not signing anything," I told them calmly. "I already gave my answer to Desmond yesterday, and a few cucumber sandwiches are not going to change my mind. I am not going to fall on my sword to save a man who actively steals from minority business grants." Chantel's face flushed a deep mottled red with absolute rage. She leaned across the coffee table, her eyes wild with a terrifying desperation. "We knew you would be difficult about this," she hissed, "which is why we prepared a backup plan." She pulled a separate manila folder from her bag and tossed it aggressively onto the table. It fell open, revealing a series of drafted legal complaints and official intake forms from the State Department of Child and Family Services. My heart gave a singular cold thud as I realized exactly what they were doing. They had moved past financial threats and were now aiming for the only thing in the world I truly cared about. Valerie stood up, pacing the room like a caged predator. "If you do not sign those financial transfer documents today, Kiara, we are filing an emergency report with Child Protective Services tomorrow morning," she threatened, her voice echoing harshly in the elegant sitting room. "We have already drafted statements claiming that your food truck lifestyle is wildly unstable and that Zuri is being actively neglected. We will tell the social workers that you live in unsafe conditions and that you are mentally unfit to raise a child. We have the social standing, the elite connections, and the expensive lawyers to ensure a judge listens to us. They will take Zuri away from you and place her in our temporary custody until you are deemed fit by the state. You will lose your daughter, Kiara." Chantel smiled a wicked, triumphant smile, seeing the rigid stillness of my posture. "We will drag your name through family court," she added, twisting the knife deeper. "You will spend years fighting us in the system, and you do not have the money for a good custody lawyer. Sign the debt transfer document, save Bradley Company, and you get to keep your kid. Refuse, and we will make sure Zuri grows up calling me mother instead of you." The sheer malice of their plan hung in the air, a toxic cloud of extortion and betrayal. They were willing to weaponize my 10-year-old daughter to destroy her peace and tear our family apart just to save themselves from a financial disaster of their own making. They viewed Zuri as nothing more than leverage, a pawn to be traded for $4 million. This was the absolute lowest depth of their depravity. They had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. I looked at the Child Protective Services forms spreading across the table, then at my mother, who was standing proudly by the antique china cabinet, looking incredibly satisfied with her ruthless strategy. I did not scream at them. I did not cry. I did not drop to my knees and beg them to spare my daughter. Instead, I slowly raised my hand and pointed my index finger directly at the delicate diamond and pearl brooch pinned to the collar of my sundress. The small, beautiful piece of jewelry glinted brightly in the afternoon sunlight, catching their attention. "Did you know that the state of Georgia operates under a one-party consent law?" I asked, my voice echoing with a terrifying razor-sharp clarity across the silent room. "It means that as long as one person involved in a conversation consents to it being recorded, the recording is completely legal and entirely admissible in a court of law." Chantel's triumphant smile vanished instantly. Her eyes locked onto the brooch, her breathing suddenly shallow. Valerie stopped pacing, freezing right in front of her beloved glass china cabinet. I tapped the center pearl of the brooch twice, revealing a tiny, solid green light that had been hidden within the design. "This is a high-definition audio transmitter," I explained calmly, standing up from the sofa. "I just recorded you both actively attempting to extort me using maliciously false reports to Child Protective Services. I recorded you admitting to the forged financial documents and threatening to kidnap my daughter if I did not sign a fraudulent legal contract. This entire conversation is currently being transmitted directly to a secure cloud server managed by my corporate legal team. Camille has every single word, and she is preparing to send it to the authorities in exactly 5 minutes." Valerie let out a piercing, guttural scream that sounded entirely inhuman. The realization that she had just confessed to multiple federal and state crimes on a recorded line shattered her fragile grip on reality. She lunged forward, her hands outstretched, resembling a wild animal trying to physically grab the brooch from my chest. I simply stepped to the side with practiced elegance, removing myself from her path. Valerie, blinded by pure panic and wearing highly impractical designer heels, lost her balance on the Persian rug. She stumbled forward, unable to stop her heavy momentum, and crashed violently into the massive antique china cabinet. The heavy glass doors shattered on impact all over the hardwood floor. The sound of breaking china echoed like a bomb going off in the house. Entire shelves collapsed, sending generations of expensive heirloom plates smashing into a million irreparable pieces around her feet. Chantel shrieked, covering her head, as the destruction rained down, the family legacy literally crumbling into dust right in front of them. I stood completely unharmed, looking over my mother, who was sprawled on the floor among the ruined heirlooms, looking up at me in absolute wide-eyed terror. She was panting, clutching a broken teacup, her perfect hair in disarray. "Please try not to break the furniture, Mom," I said, my voice dripping with cold, absolute authority. "Technically, as of yesterday afternoon, I own this house." I turned my back on them, walking out the front door and leaving them screaming in the ruins of their shattered reality. The crisp morning air carried a slight chill as I drove away from my parents' shattered china cabinet and their crumbling illusions. I had left them screaming in the wreckage of their own making, but my work was far from over. Tomorrow night was the highly anticipated alumni gala, and there were still crucial pieces of my strategy that needed to fall perfectly into place. I navigated through the busy Atlanta traffic, heading straight for the towering financial institution that held the keys to Bradley's entire corporate existence. I was running out of time and cash very fast right now. Bradley needed immediate liquidity to rent luxury cars and buy expensive champagne to maintain his pathetic facade at the upcoming event. He foolishly believed that his anonymous billionaire savior would effortlessly guarantee a brand new bridge loan from the bank. He assumed his financial troubles were magically erased the moment my holding company purchased his debt. What he completely failed to understand was that buying a debt does not mean forgiving it. It means transferring absolute ownership and ruthless control over every single financial breath you take. I was heading to the bank to cut his oxygen line permanently today. I parked my car in the exclusive VIP underground parking area reserved strictly for executive board members and majority shareholders. I stepped onto the private elevator and rode it up to the luxurious lobby level of the financial institution. The bank interior was a stunning display of wealth, with polished marble floors, towering glass walls, and plush leather seating areas scattered throughout the main floor. I wore a simple black dress and comfortable shoes, looking entirely unassuming as I walked past the velvet ropes intended to separate the common customers from the high-net-worth individuals doing real business there. As I approached the executive suite waiting area, my eyes landed on a familiar figure pacing nervously near the reception desk. It was Bradley, wearing an ill-fitting designer suit and clutching a leather briefcase, as if his entire life depended on whatever documents were hidden inside. He was sweating profusely, running his hands through his hair and repeatedly checking his expensive watch. He looked exactly like a desperate man standing on the very edge of total ruin, preparing to beg a loan officer for one final chance to survive another day. The sheer panic was radiating from him visibly. I took a seat on a plush velvet sofa across the lobby, crossing my legs and opening a business magazine, pretending to read, while I watched his pathetic display unfold. Before long, his frantic pacing brought him right into my direct line of sight. He stopped dead in his tracks, staring at me with a mixture of absolute confusion and deep disgust. He immediately puffed out his chest, attempting to project an aura of wealthy superiority, masking his desperate situation behind a fragile wall of arrogant, white privilege. "What are you doing in this part of the bank?" he demanded. I slowly lowered my magazine, offering him a calm, pleasant smile. "Just taking care of some routine, financial matters." "Bradley," I replied, my voice echoing softly in the quiet waiting area. "It takes quite a bit of administrative effort to manage personal portfolios these days." He scoffed loudly, shaking his head with an exaggerated expression of mockery. "Applying for a microloan to keep your little taco stand running," he sneered, taking a step closer to tower over me. "You really should not be wasting these loan officers' valuable time with your petty street vendor problems. It is highly inappropriate." He straightened his jacket, running a hand over the lapel, displaying his gold watch prominently. "Let me show you how real business is done in this city. Kiara, I am here to finalize a major bridge loan for my upcoming commercial development project. My corporate debt was just purchased by a billionaire investment firm overnight. They believe in my vision so much they paid cash to buy my entire portfolio. I am basically untouchable right now, so you should probably just go back to flipping burgers before you embarrass yourself any further in front of these elite financial executives today." I nodded slowly, maintaining my serene smile. "Good luck with your meeting, Bradley. I truly hope the bank gives your account the exact level of attention it currently deserves." The receptionist called his name, instructing him to enter the senior loan officer's private suite. He threw one last triumphant smirk in my direction, adjusted his tie, and marched through the heavy glass doors, looking completely certain that he was about to walk out with millions of dollars in fresh capital. I remained seated, calmly folding my hands over my magazine, waiting for the beautiful, inevitable explosion to occur right now. 5 minutes passed in absolute peaceful silence. The soft jazz music playing in the lobby created a perfectly soothing atmosphere, contrasting beautifully with the violent storm brewing just behind those closed doors. Then suddenly the heavy glass doors burst open with explosive force. Bradley came stumbling out backward, his face flushed dark crimson with absolute outrage. He was screaming at the top of his lungs wildly, waving his leather briefcase in the air. Two large security guards dressed in immaculate dark suits flanked him on either side, physically guiding him backward out of the office, keeping a very firm grip. "You cannot do this to me!" he roared, his voice echoing violently across the entire banking floor. "I am an elite developer. You are making a massive mistake. I have a billionaire backer who just purchased my entire corporate debt portfolio. My company is fully solvent. Do you know who I am? I will have your job for this, you incompetent fool." The senior loan officer, a distinguished older gentleman, stepped out of the office following the security guards. He looked completely unbothered by the dramatic tantrum, adjusting his glasses and holding a single sheet of printed paper firmly now. "Sir, please lower your voice," the loan officer said smoothly, maintaining perfect professional composure. "We are merely following the explicit legal instructions provided by the new primary shareholder of your debt portfolio. Your accounts have been entirely flagged for severe fraudulent activity. Your request for a bridge loan is permanently denied, and all your existing credit lines have been immediately frozen by order of the current holding company owner. You have absolutely zero available funds at this institution. Please leave the premises before we are forced to involve local law enforcement to remove you from this building right away, Bradley." Bradley struggled against the security guards, looking like a rabid animal backed into a very dark corner. "What instructions?" he yelled, spittle flying from his mouth. "The holding company bought my debt to save me. I am the anonymous buyer's golden goose. There is no way they ordered you to freeze my accounts. You are misinterpreting the documents. You need to call K Holdings right now and clear this up." The bank manager, the highest-ranking executive in the entire branch, stepped out from his private corner suite. He walked briskly past the struggling man and stopped before me totally. The bank manager bowed deeply, his hands clasped respectfully in front of him. "Madam Chairwoman," he said, his voice loud and clear, cutting through the tense atmosphere of the lobby, We have executed the asset freeze precisely as your legal team requested yesterday afternoon. Every single dollar associated with Mr. Bradley accounts has been successfully locked down. He is completely insolvent, per your direct command. Is there anything else you require from our financial institution today? Bradley stopped, struggling immediately. His eyes darted from the bowing bank manager to me, sitting calmly on the sofa holding my small designer bag. I stood up gracefully, smoothing the front of my black dress. I offered the manager a warm, professional smile. You have handled everything perfectly, I said simply. Thank you for your prompt efficiency. The look of absolute horror that washed over Bradley's face was a masterpiece of human devastation. His jaw hung slack, his eyes bulging as the gears in his narcissistic brain finally began to turn, grinding against a reality he could not possibly accept. The street cook, the food truck failure, the woman he had just mocked was the anonymous billionaire who now entirely owned his pathetic life. He ripped his arm away from the security guard, pointing a shaking, trembling finger directly at my chest. You, he stammered, his voice cracking under the weight of his own sudden realization. You are not K Holdings. You are just a broke cook. You are sleeping with the CEO of K Holdings. That is it, you whore. You manipulated some rich executive into buying my debt just to get back at me for the dinner bill. You think this makes you powerful? I will expose you to the board. I will tell everyone exactly what street trash you truly are. I let out a slow, genuine laugh, watching him desperately cling to his racist, misogynistic worldview rather than accept the simple fact that a black woman had outsmarted and outmaneuvered him completely. I stepped closer to him, invading his personal space, until he was forced to look up into my eyes. I am the board. Bradley. I whispered, my voice dangerously low. I am the anonymous billionaire. And tomorrow night at the gala, I am going to stand on that stage and dismantle your entire fake life brick by miserable brick. Do not bother renting a tuxedo for it either. I turned on my heel, the soft clicking of my shoes, sounding like a ticking clock, marking the final hours of his freedom. I walked out the sliding glass doors of the bank, leaving him screaming profanities as the security guards dragged his thrashing body toward the service exit. My personal driver had already pulled my sleek black Maybach up to the curb, sensing my approach. He opened the heavy armored door for me, and I slid into the luxurious leather back seat, crossing my legs and staring out the tinted window as the engine purred softly into quiet life. Now, I picked up my phone, checking the family group chat one last time. My mother was still sending messages, complaining about how difficult her life was, because the country club had officially suspended her membership over unpaid dues. Chantel was aggressively demanding that Bradley secure the bank loan so she could go shopping for expensive jewelry to wear at the alumni gala tomorrow night. They were completely oblivious to the fact that their entire world had just been irrevocably destroyed inside the very bank they worshipped. I simply locked my phone and poured myself a glass of sparkling water immediately. My driver pulled away from the curb, merging onto the busy downtown streets, heading toward my penthouse suite at the Ritz-Carlton. I had an appointment with my stylist to prepare for the gala. The trap had been perfectly set, the bait swallowed whole and the cage doors permanently locked. The only thing left to do was step onto that brilliantly lit stage and drop the guillotine blade on their miserable existence. Tomorrow, the elite circles of Atlanta would bear witness to the ultimate execution of pride. I took a sip of my water, enjoying the perfectly cold taste inside. They wanted a helpless victim to sacrifice for their unearned wealth, but instead they created a predator who was about to devour their entire lineage. I closed my eyes, leaning back against the soft leather as the car glided smoothly toward the hotel. The countdown had officially begun, and Bradley was currently losing his mind, trying to figure out how to escape an inescapable maze. This was not just business anymore, it was personal, absolute destruction. The truth was coming for all of them, and it was wearing a $40,000 gown that no one could ever deny today. The drive from the bank to the hotel was smooth and quiet, as the tinted windows of my vehicle shielded me from the afternoon sun shining over the bustling streets of downtown Atlanta. The skyline looked different today. It looked like a kingdom I had just conquered silently and completely. I leaned my head against the soft leather headrest, allowing the gentle hum of the engine to soothe my thoughts. My driver navigated the heavy traffic with practiced ease, bringing me directly to the private rear entrance of the Ritz-Carlton Hotel, where my penthouse suite was waiting for me. The hotel staff had been informed of my arrival, and the general manager greeted me personally at the private elevator bank. He handed me my keycard with a respectful bow, ensuring that my privacy would be completely protected throughout my stay. I rode the elevator up to the top floor, watching the city shrink beneath me as I ascended to my temporary sanctuary. I stepped out into the private foyer of the penthouse, feeling the thick plush carpet beneath my shoes. The air in the suite smelled faintly of lavender and fresh linen, a stark contrast to the suffocating arrogance I had just left behind. Behind at the bank, I walked through the massive living room, running my fingers over the expensive mahogany furniture and admiring the panoramic view of the city from the floor-to-ceiling windows. Tonight, the elite HBCU Alumni Gala would be held just a few miles away at the Atlanta Botanical Gardens, and the entire city was buzzing with anticipation. But before I could step onto that stage and deliver the final crushing blow to my family, I had to set the perfect trap for my sister Chantel. I opened my luggage and carefully pulled out a white garment bag. Inside the bag was a long, formal dress made of a cheap synthetic polyester blend. It was an incredibly basic design, a simple black gown that looked passably elegant from a distance, but felt rough and stiff to the touch. I had specifically purchased it from a discount department store earlier that week for less than $50. I deliberately hung the garment bag on the outside of the master bedroom closet door, leaving it partially unzipped, so the black fabric was clearly visible. I then placed a pair of heavy fabric scissors on the nightstand, right next to a complimentary bottle of cheap red wine that the hotel had left as a welcome gift. The bait was perfectly positioned, and I knew my sister well enough to know she would never be able to resist taking a bite. With my trap securely in place, I left the penthouse suite and took the private elevator down to the hotel spa. I had booked a 2-hour deep tissue massage and a restorative facial, wanting to look completely refreshed for the gala. The spa was a dark, quiet oasis filled with the scent of eucalyptus and the sound of trickling water. I changed into a soft white robe and lay down on the heated massage table, closing my eyes and letting the therapist work the tension out of my shoulders as the soothing music played softly in the background. My mind wandered to my childhood and the deep-rooted psychological rot that infected my sister Chantel. My parents had always told her she was the beautiful one, the golden child who was destined for greatness. They inflated her fragile ego until she believed she was inherently better than everyone else, especially me. But deep down, Chantel knew she was entirely hollow. She had no real skills, no genuine work ethic, and no actual wealth. She survived entirely on credit cards and the fake prestige of her husband Bradley. She needed me to be a failure because looking down on my supposed food truck lifestyle was the only thing that made her feel tall. I knew that the absolute worst thing that could happen to a narcissist like Chantel was the prospect of being outshone at a major social event. She had spent months bragging to her fake friends about the exclusive gala tonight, claiming she was going to be the center of attention, rubbing shoulders with billionaires and politicians. The thought of me showing up to her elite gathering, even in cheap clothes, terrified her fragile ego. She needed to ensure I was completely humiliated and broken before the event even began, and I knew she would use her desperate connections to try and sabotage me. I lay on the massage table, breathing in the calming eucalyptus oil, feeling a dark sense of satisfaction, knowing that she was probably making her move at this very second. After 2 hours of absolute relaxation, I thanked the massage therapist and took the elevator back up to my penthouse suite. The hallway was perfectly quiet as I approached my door. I tapped my keycard against the reader and pushed the heavy wooden door open, taking a slow, deliberate breath. The moment I stepped into the foyer, I could smell the sharp, acidic scent of cheap red wine wafting through the air from the master bedroom. I did not rush or panic. I simply smiled and walked slowly toward the bedroom, my sensible shoes making no sound on the carpet. I stood in the doorway of the bedroom, and looked at the beautiful destruction she had left behind. The cheap black polyester dress had been violently ripped from its hanger and thrown onto the middle of the expensive king-sized bed. The fabric had been slashed to ribbons with the heavy scissors I had conveniently left on the nightstand. Long, jagged cuts ran through the bodice and the skirt, destroying the garment entirely. The bottle of welcome wine had been opened and poured carelessly all over the ruined fabric, leaving dark red stains soaking into the mattress and the white hotel sheets. It was a pathetic, chaotic mess, born of pure jealousy and desperate malice. Resting right on top of the wine-soaked fabric was a piece of hotel stationery. Chantel had grabbed a pen from the desk and scrawled a messy, aggressive note in her recognizable handwriting. The ink was slightly smudged from the wine, but the message was perfectly clear. I read the words silently to myself. Know your place. Street cook, do not even try to show up tonight. You will never belong in our world. I let out a soft, genuine laugh that echoed in the quiet hotel room. She was so incredibly predictable, so blindingly consumed by her own toxic hatred, that she could not even see the massive trap closing around her legs. I pulled my phone from my pocket and dialed my lead attorney, Camille, placing the phone to my ear as I walked around the ruined bed, looking at the slashed fabric from different angles. Camille answered on the first ring, her voice crisp and professional. I told Camille that the rat had officially taken the cheese in the penthouse suite. Camille let out a low chuckle and confirmed that our security team had already pulled the hallway footage. She told me that Chantel had leveraged a connection with a corrupt hotel maid, slipping the woman a few $100s in cash to gain unauthorized access to my room while I was downstairs at the spa. The cameras had captured Chantel sneaking nervously down the hallway, looking over her shoulder before slipping into my suite. She had stayed inside for exactly 7 minutes before hurrying back out with a smug, satisfied look on her face, completely oblivious to the hidden security cameras observing her every move. I told Camille to add the breaking and entering footage to our growing mountain of evidence alongside the property destruction and the handwritten confession note Chantel had foolishly left on the bed. We briefly discussed the timeline for the evening, ensuring that the police and the federal agents were perfectly coordinated for the final raid at the Botanical Gardens. Camille assured me that the stage was set and the financial trap was locked tight. I thanked her and ended the call, tossing my phone onto the pristine glass desk by the window. I walked over to my heavy leather luggage trunk, which sat untouched in the corner of the room. I ran my fingers along the bottom edge of the trunk, locating a small, hidden zipper that was completely invisible to the naked eye. I pulled the zipper back, revealing a secret climate-controlled compartment built into the base of the luggage inside. Resting carefully in a protective silk bag was the actual dress I had chosen for the gala. I gently lifted the garment bag out of the trunk and unzipped the front, laying the masterpiece out on the small velvet sofa by the window. The dress was an absolute vision of power and wealth. It was a custom $40,000 gown designed exclusively by the House of Schiaparelli. It was constructed from heavy emerald green silk that pooled like liquid glass, catching the afternoon light and reflecting it beautifully. The entire bodice was meticulously hand-embroidered with thousands of tiny black and gold glass beads, forming a subtle geometric pattern that radiated pure authority. It was not a dress meant for a street cook or a struggling single mother. It was a dress designed for a billionaire corporate titan who was about to execute a hostile takeover of her own family. It felt heavy and substantial in my hands, a physical manifestation of my hard work, my brilliant investments, and my unbreakable resilience. As I admired the flawless beadwork, my mind briefly shifted across town to imagine the miserable preparations my sister was currently enduring. Chantel was undoubtedly standing in front of a mirror right now, squeezing her body into a rented designer dress she could not afford. The rental boutique had probably warned her not to alter the garment, so the fit would be entirely wrong, bunching at the waist and pinching at her shoulders. She would be sweating, trying to cover the cheap fabric with fake jewelry and excessive makeup, desperately trying to mask her severe financial ruin. Bradley would be pacing nervously in their mortgaged living room, wearing an ill-fitting suit, sweating through his collar as his phone blew up with angry messages from unpaid creditors. They thought they had won. They thought destroying a $50 piece of polyester had secured their dominance for the evening. They believed they were walking into a room full of elite peers who respected them, completely unaware that they were actually walking directly to the slaughterhouse. I called the hotel concierge and requested a cleaning crew to discreetly handle the wine-soaked bed, giving them strict instructions to leave the slashed dress exactly where it lay, as a quiet monument to my sister's stupidity. Soon after, my personal hair and makeup team arrived at the suite carrying their heavy cases of professional supplies. I sat in front of the large lighted mirror, closing my eyes as they went to work, transforming my appearance. The makeup artist highlighted my features with sharp, elegant precision, while the hairstylist swept my hair into a sleek, commanding style that framed my face perfectly. The transformation took 2 hours, but when I finally opened my eyes and looked at my reflection, I did not recognize the scapegoat daughter who had been bullied and belittled her entire life. I saw a ruthless, untouchable chairwoman who held the fate of her abusers in the palm of her hand. I stepped into the heavy emerald silk of the Schiaparelli gown, feeling the cool, smooth fabric wrap around my body. The thousands of glass beads shimmered brilliantly as I moved, creating a soft, luxurious, rustling sound in the quiet suite. The dress fit me flawlessly, hugging my curves and projecting an aura of absolute dominance. I slipped my feet into a pair of black designer heels and secured my diamond earrings, letting them catch the light. I did not wear a necklace, allowing the intricate beadwork of the gown to command all the attention. I picked up my small black clutch, which contained nothing but my phone, my lipstick, and the printed banking documents that would destroy Bradley's life forever. I walked out of the penthouse suite and took the private elevator down to the ground floor. The hotel staff stopped what they were doing and stared as I walked through the quiet rear lobby, the sheer presence of the gown demanding their silent respect. My driver was standing by the open door of the deep black Maybach, waiting patiently in the warm evening air. He offered his hand, and I stepped gracefully into the plush leather interior of the vehicle as he closed the heavy door. The quiet luxury of the car enveloped me, providing a brief moment of total silence before the storm. My driver slid into the front seat and put the vehicle into gear, steering us smoothly onto the main road toward the Atlanta Botanical Gardens. The sun was just beginning to set, casting a fiery orange and purple glow over the city skyline. The countdown to the gala had officially begun. My parents and my sister were probably arriving at the venue right now, posing arrogantly for the cameras, believing they were the most important people in the room. They thought they had successfully erased me from their perfect narrative. They thought the velvet ropes of elite society would protect them from the consequences of their fraud. They had absolutely no idea that the anonymous billionaire they were waiting to worship was sitting in the back of this car, wearing a $40,000 gown, preparing to walk onto that stage and burn their entire fake empire to the ground. The ground tonight was not just a social event, it was a public execution, and I was more than ready to deliver the final blow. The deep black Maybach glided silently through the warm evening streets of Atlanta, heading toward the Botanical Gardens, where the elite HBCU Alumni Gala was already in full swing. The entire city seemed to be holding its breath. The Botanical Gardens had been completely transformed for the night into an absolute fortress of wealth and power. Towering arrangements of rare white orchids and cascading hydrangeas lined the sweeping entrance, while massive security details guarded every possible access point. This was not just a simple charity dinner. It was the single most important networking event in the southern United States. Politicians, billionaires, real estate tycoons, and the absolute upper echelon of Black society were all gathering under one roof to celebrate excellence and secure their financial futures. My driver pulled the heavy armored vehicle into the designated VIP holding area, allowing me to watch the main red carpet entrance through the tinted privacy glass. I sat back against the luxurious leather seats, crossing my legs and taking a slow, calming breath, preparing my mind for the execution that was about to take place. I watched through the dark window as a white stretch limousine pulled up to the curb near the back of the line. It was an older model, clearly rented by the hour from a discount service, a desperate attempt to project wealth they did not possess. The chauffeur opened the door and out stepped My parents followed closely by Chantel and Bradley. The sheer desperation radiating from them was almost palpable. Even from a distance, Valerie. My mother wore an overly flashy sequined gown that looked cheap and garish under the elegant event lighting. She immediately began waving frantically at the paparazzi who were mostly ignoring her, trying to manufacture an aura of importance that simply did not exist. Desmond trailed behind her, adjusting his tie, nervously trying to look like a wealthy patriarch, but failing miserably. He looked like a broken man carrying the invisible weight of his suspended country club membership and his looming financial ruin. But it was Chantel and Bradley who provided the most pathetic spectacle of the evening. Chantel stepped out of the limousine wearing a rented designer dress that was entirely the wrong size for her body. The fabric bunched awkwardly at her waist and pinched tightly around her shoulders, restricting her movement. She kept tugging at the bodice, looking deeply uncomfortable and intensely insecure. She had layered herself in fake costume jewelry, trying to mimic the understated elegance of the real billionaires walking the carpet ahead of her. Bradley looked even worse. He was sweating profusely in a suit that was slightly wrinkled, clutching his wife by the arm and looking around with wide, frantic eyes. He was a man drowning in $4 million of toxic debt, desperately searching the crowd for the anonymous billionaire he believed was going to save his life. They posed arrogantly for a group of photographers who were not even looking in their direction. Their fake smiles stretched tight across their terrified faces. My driver received the digital signal from the event coordinators and slowly pulled the Maybach away from the holding area, gliding smoothly up to the very front of the red carpet, right where the most exclusive guests were dropped off. The heavy door was opened for me, and I stepped out into the warm Atlanta night. The moment my foot touched the red carpet, the entire atmosphere of the entrance seemed to shift dramatically. The flashbulbs of the paparazzi cameras erupted in a blinding wave of white, light drawn instantly to the sheer magnetic power of the emerald green Schiaparelli gown. It shimmered like liquid glass under the event lighting, the thousands of hand-embroidered black and gold beads catching every single flash and reflecting it back with blinding intensity. The heavy silk rustled softly as I walked, projecting an aura of absolute untouchable dominance. The crowd of onlookers and journalists pushed against the barricades, murmuring in awe at the spectacular display of raw, undeniable wealth. Chantel was the first one to see me. She was standing near the velvet rope, trying to convince a bored photographer to take her picture, when her eyes locked onto my face. Her jaw literally dropped open, her mouth hanging completely slack as her narcissistic brain tried to process the impossible image standing in front of her. She looked at my face, then down to the $40,000 masterpiece, wrapping my body, and the blood completely drained from her cheeks, leaving her looking like a pale, trembling ghost. She actually stumbled backward, stepping heavily on the hem of her rented dress, leaving a dirty footprint on the fabric. She realized in that exact moment that the cheap polyester dress she had slashed in the hotel room was nothing but a decoy, a humiliating trap. She had walked blindly into her entire world, shattered right there on the red carpet, as she realized she had been completely outsmarted by the sister she considered a failure. Valerie noticed Chantel panicking and turned around to see what had caused her golden child to freeze in sheer terror. When my mother's eyes met mine, her face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred and deep-seated panic. She could not comprehend how the daughter she had tried to destroy, the daughter she had tried to report to Child Protective Services just days ago, was standing on the red carpet, looking like absolute royalty. Valerie abandoned all pretense of high society elegance and marched aggressively toward me, intercepting my path right before the heavy brass velvet rope that guarded the entrance to the main ballroom. She blocked my way, her chest heaving with indignation and rage, her eyes darting frantically over the exquisite beadwork of my gown. "How did you afford that dress?" She hissed, her voice a venomous whisper, meant only for me, but loud enough for the nearby security guards to hear. "Did you steal it? Did you take out another payday loan? Just to come here and ruin your sister's special night? You are nothing but a common street cook. You do not belong here. You are going to embarrass this entire family." She turned wildly toward the massive security guard standing by the velvet rope, waving her arms in a frantic, demanding gesture. Security. She shrieked, her voice pitching upward into a hysterical tone. This woman is not on the guest list. She is a fraud. Throw her out immediately. Remove her from the premises before she causes a scene. Bradley noticed the commotion and came pushing his way roughly through the elegant crowd, wiping sweat from his forehead with a crumpled handkerchief. He looked at me with wild, frantic eyes, his desperate brain completely refusing to accept the reality of the situation. He marched straight up to the head of security, a towering, broad-shouldered man in a pristine black suit, who was calmly observing the altercation without moving a single muscle. Bradley puffed out his chest, trying to use his white privilege to command the space. Pointing a shaking, aggressive finger directly at my face, he decided to throw his imaginary weight around, completely oblivious to the fact that he was yelling at the very people I paid to protect me. "I am the guest of honor tonight!" Bradley shouted at the head of security, trying to make his voice sound deep and authoritative, though it cracked slightly with panic. The CEO of K Holdings, the anonymous billionaire who just bought my entire corporate debt portfolio, is inside waiting to meet me. Right now, my family is elite, and we do not associate with street vendors. Remove this trash from the red carpet. Immediately, she is stalking us, and she is a danger to my business. Negotiations, throw her out, into the street where she belongs, or I will have your job by tomorrow morning. Do you know who I am? I am a highly successful corporate developer. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I did not defend myself. I simply stood there, draped in $40,000 of heavy emerald silk, looking at Bradley with an expression of profound clinical disgust. It was the exact same look you might give a cockroach right before you crush it under your shoe. I waited in absolute perfect silence, letting his pathetic, delusional screaming echo across the red carpet, letting the surrounding politicians and billionaires witness his complete mental breakdown. The paparazzi had stopped taking pictures of the celebrities and turned their lenses entirely on us, capturing every single bead of sweat rolling down. Bradley panicked face, every vein popping out of Valerie's neck, every tremble in Chantel ruined rented dress. The head of security did not blink. He did not reach for my arm. He did not ask to see my invitation. He simply stood there like a mountain of stone, listening to a voice coming through his discreet, clear earpiece. He looked down at Bradley, pointing finger, and then looked Bradley directly in the eyes. The security chief expression shifted from passive observation to absolute towering authority. He stepped forward, closing the distance between himself and my arrogant brother-in-law, forcing Bradley to instinctively take a step backward in fear. "Sir, the head of security," said his deep voice, carrying a heavy weight of finality that silenced the immediate area. K Holdings is the sole platinum sponsor of tonight's gala. They funded this entire event. They own the building you are standing in, and they sign my paychecks. He turned his back completely on Bradley, dismissing the man as if he were nothing more than a minor, annoying insect. The massive security chief reached out with a white-gloved hand and unclipped the heavy brass velvet rope, pulling it aside to clear a wide, immaculate path directly to the grand ballroom doors. He turned to me, placed his hand over his heart, and bowed deeply from the waist, holding the posture of absolute respect for several long seconds. "Welcome, Madam Chairwoman," he said, his voice echoing clearly across the stunned, silent crowd. The stage is ready for you." The words hit my family like a physical shockwave of explosive force, a devastating bomb detonating directly inside their fragile, narcissistic brains. Valerie let out a small, choked gasp, her hands flying up to cover her mouth as the reality of the situation finally crushed the breath out of her lungs. Desmond, who had been standing a few feet away, completely froze, his eyes widening in sheer absolute terror as he realized the daughter he had tried to extort at the country club was the sole owner of the entire event. Bradley's face turned the color of wet ash, his mouth opening and closing without producing a single sound. The arrogant developer who had spent the last 2 years stealing minority loans and mocking my food truck finally understood that the anonymous billionaire he had been worshipping the entity that owned his $4 million debt. His company and his freedom was standing right in front of him, wearing an emerald gown. Chantel physically collapsed, dropping to her knees on the red carpet right in front of the flashing cameras, unable to support the weight of her own crushing humiliation. The cheap seams of her rented dress audibly ripped as she hit the ground, but no one moved to help her. The entire crowd of elite alumni, wealthy investors, and powerful politicians stared at my family with unhidden contempt, realizing instantly that these people had just tried to humiliate the most powerful woman in the room. I did not look down at them. I did not offer them a single word of explanation or comfort. Their execution was scheduled for the main stage, and I was not going to waste my breath in the lobby. I kept my head held high, my posture radiating absolute lethal authority, and I glided smoothly past their paralyzed, trembling bodies, stepping over the velvet rope and walking directly through the heavy mahogany doors into the brilliant, blinding light of the grand ballroom, leaving them suffocating in the dark reality of their own total destruction. The grand ballroom of the Atlanta Botanical Gardens was a breathtaking masterpiece of modern luxury and elite Southern elegance. Massive crystal chandeliers hung from the high vaulted ceiling, casting a warm golden light over dozens of perfectly arranged circular tables covered in crisp white linen and adorned with towering centerpieces of white roses and rare orchids. A string quartet played softly in the corner, providing a sophisticated soundtrack to the quiet murmurs of the most powerful politicians and wealthy business tycoons in the city. I glided into the room feeling the heavy emerald silk of my gorgeous custom Schiaparelli gown brush against the polished marble floor, projecting an aura of absolute untouchable authority. The event coordinator immediately stepped forward, bowing respectfully before guiding me toward the main stage behind me. I could hear the frantic shuffling footsteps of my family as they stumbled blindly through the heavy mahogany doors. Their minds were completely short-circuiting, violently rejecting the terrifying reality that was unfolding around them. They were physically shaking, sweating profusely as the ushers led them to their designated seats, ironically placed at the very front row, directly facing the stage. They had walked into a beautifully constructed execution chamber. Valerie collapsed into her velvet chair, her chest heaving as she struggled to pull oxygen into her panic. Constricted lungs. Desmond sat rigidly beside her, his eyes completely glazed over, staring blankly ahead, like a man who had just been handed a terminal diagnosis. Chantel was practically hyperventilating, clutching the ripped fabric of her cheap rented dress, trying desperately to hide the tear from the wealthy socialites sitting at the adjacent tables. Bradley looked the absolute worst. He was trembling uncontrollably, wiping continuous streams of sweat from his pale forehead, his eyes darting frantically around the magnificent ballroom, desperately searching for any possible escape route. But there was no way out. The heavy ballroom doors had been securely closed and locked by my security detail, sealing them inside the trap. The lights in the grand ballroom slowly began to dim, signaling the beginning of the evening program. A hush fell over the elite crowd as the string quartet faded out and a bright white spotlight illuminated the main stage. The current mayor of Atlanta, a distinguished man wearing a perfectly tailored tuxedo, walked confidently up the steps and approached the crystal podium, tapping the microphone lightly to command the room. Good evening, distinguished alumni, esteemed guests, and visionary leaders. The mayor began, his rich baritone voice echoing through the state-of-the-art sound system tonight. We gather to celebrate Black excellence and unparalleled corporate achievement. We are here to honor a truly remarkable individual, a woman who has single-handedly revolutionized our cities, hospitality and commercial real estate industry, saving countless historical properties from complete financial ruin during times of unprecedented economic uncertainty. For years, she has operated entirely in the shadows, letting her brilliant investments and ruthless business acumen speak for themselves, building a massive, untouchable corporate empire. Bradley gripped the edge of his table so tightly, his knuckles turned completely white. He was still silently praying to a god that was ignoring him, desperately hoping the mayor was going to call someone else's name, expecting another anonymous billionaire to walk out from behind the velvet curtains and save his miserable, fraudulent life. The mayor smiled, looking directly at the VIP section where I was standing quietly in the shadows, waiting for my cue. Please join me in welcoming the anonymous founder and chief executive officer of K Holdings, the brilliant and visionary Madam Chairwoman Kiara. Right now, the entire ballroom erupted into a deafening standing ovation. Hundreds of millionaires and politicians rose to their feet, clapping enthusiastically. I stepped out of the shadows and then walked slowly up the carpeted stairs to the stage, the emerald beads of my gown catching the bright spotlight and scattering brilliant flashes of light across the darkened room. I walked directly to the podium, the applause continuing to roar around me. I looked down at the front row, my eyes locking onto my family. They looked like they had just been hit by a massive freight train. Valerie was openly weeping, now silent tears streaming down her carefully made-up face, ruining her expensive cosmetics. Desmond looked like he was going to pass out, his hands clutching his chest. Chantel was staring at me with a mixture of absolute awe and soul-crushing envy, realizing she would never in a million lifetimes achieve a fraction of the power I currently commanded. Bradley looked completely broken, his arrogant posture entirely dissolved, leaving behind a pathetic, terrified shell of a man. I raised my hand, gracefully, and the applause slowly died down until the grand ballroom was completely silent, hanging on my every word. Thank you all for this incredible honor. I began my voice, calm, smooth, and echoing with lethal precision. They say family is your absolute foundation. They say family is the bedrock upon which you build your entire life, your support system through the darkest storms. But sometimes family is the very rot you have to tear out of the walls to build your empire. Sometimes the people who share your blood are the same people who will willingly forge your signature and sell your future to the highest bidder, just to protect their own fragile, superficial social standing in society. The crowd remained perfectly silent, captivated by the intense emotional weight of my words. My family shifted uncomfortably in their seats, knowing exactly where this was going, but entirely powerless to stop it. I have spent my entire life being treated like an outcast in my own home. I continued keeping my eyes locked dead on my mother, who was visibly shrinking under my gaze. They mocked my career choices. They called me a failure. They threw breadcrumbs at my daughter while they feasted on lobster, thinking they were untouchable elites. But true power does not need to boast loudly. True power moves in absolute silence, and today, that silence is finally breaking. I raised my hand and signaled the audiovisual booth at the back of the room. The massive LED screens behind me did not light up with my corporate K Holdings logo. Instead, they flashed brilliant white, displaying high-definition scans of highly confidential bank records and commercial real estate contracts. The elite crowd gasped collectively as they saw the documents blown up to 20 feet tall. The first document was the commercial loan application, featuring Valerie and Desmond's signatures, right next to my clearly forged signature, indicating the massive $4 million toxic debt they had fraudulently strapped to my name. A low murmur of shock and deep disgust rippled through the wealthy audience as they quickly read the legal implications of the projected documents. They were sophisticated business people. They knew exactly what identity theft and bank fraud looked like, and they were currently staring right at it. People at the tables closest to my family began to lean away from them, looking at Valerie and Desmond with unhidden revulsion. The social death they feared more than anything else was happening live on stage. "Right now, I am not finished," I said coldly, leaning closer to the microphone. The massive lead screens shifted, transitioning to a new set of highly incriminating financial documents. These were Bradley personal and corporate bank statements meticulously highlighted in bright red ink to show the devastating truth. These documents show funds that were explicitly granted to support minority-owned businesses in the greater Atlanta area. I announced, my voice cutting through the rising tension in the room. Instead of developing the community, the money was systematically embezzled and funneled directly into offshore accounts to fund a fake, luxurious lifestyle. A complete criminal illusion maintained by a man who actively used my black family legacy as a convenient shield for his massive corporate fraud. The crowd erupted into angry whispers. The politicians and investors in the room who championed minority business development were staring at Bradley with pure murderous rage he had completely crossed the line, stealing resources from their communities to pay for his cheap rented limousines and country club memberships. Bradley suddenly snapped, his fragile mind unable to process the total annihilation of his entire existence. He jumped up from his front row seat, violently knocking his heavy chair backward. The chair crashed loudly onto the polished marble floor, causing several guests to jump in surprise. Bradley pointed a shaking, sweaty finger at me, his face contorted in a mask of absolute pure desperation. "Turn that off!" he screamed at the top of his lungs, his voice cracking hysterically. "Turn those screens off right now. She is lying to all of you. She is a complete fraud. She is just a bitter, broke cook, trying to ruin my pristine reputation. I am a highly successful developer. You have to believe me. This is a setup, an illegal character assassination tonight." I did not step back from the podium. I did not call for security to silence him. I leaned forward, gripping the edges of the crystal lectern, and looked down at him with eyes as cold and unforgiving as deep winter ice. "I bought your toxic debt, Bradley," I said, my voice amplifying across the massive ballroom, washing over his frantic screams. "Which means I officially own your entire company. I own every single asset you possess. I own the very chair you just knocked over. And as my very first act as the new chief executive officer of your pathetic, miserable, sinking corporation, I bypassed our internal corporate audit and submitted your unredacted financial records directly to the federal authorities." The silence that followed my declaration was so absolute, you could have heard a pin drop on the carpeted stairs. Bradley's mouth hung open, his arm dropping limply to his side, the realization of his impending federal prison sentence hitting him with the force of a physical blow. He looked around the room, seeing nothing but hostile, disgusted faces staring back at him. There was no anonymous billionaire coming to save him. There was no magical bridge loan coming to bail out his massive ego. There was only the street cook he had relentlessly mocked, standing above him holding the executioner's axe. I stood gracefully at the podium, watching the glorious, beautiful devastation unfold right before my eyes, knowing my brutal, meticulous vengeance was finally perfectly, totally, and beautifully complete tonight forevermore. The heavy mahogany doors at the back of the grand ballroom suddenly burst open with terrifying force. A team of federal agents wearing dark, tactical windbreakers, with large yellow letters printed across their backs, marched aggressively into the elegant space, their heavy boots stomping in perfect, terrifying unison against the polished marble floor. Local Atlanta police officers flanked them, creating a secure perimeter around the exit doors. The wealthy guests immediately parted, creating a wide, clear path straight down the center aisle, leading directly to the front row where my family was sitting, completely paralyzed. The lead federal agent, a tall, imposing man with a stern, no-nonsense expression, walked briskly past the shocked politicians and billionaires. He marched straight up to the VIP table, ignoring Valerie, who was openly sobbing into her hands, and Desmond, who had buried his face in his lap. The agent stopped directly in front of Bradley, pulling a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his tactical belt, the metallic clicking sound echoing sharply in the tense, quiet atmosphere of the massive grand ballroom, bringing the ultimate reality crashing down upon them all. Bradley did not try to run. He simply stood there crying silently, as the cold steel bracelets clamped tightly around his trembling wrists, securing his ultimate downfall. The elite society he had desperately tried to impress watched his complete humiliation with absolute merciless satisfaction. Valerie and Chantel began to wail hysterically, realizing their fake world was officially destroyed forever. The heavy silence in the grand ballroom was broken only by the sharp metallic clicking of the handcuffs securing Bradley's wrists behind his back. The federal agents moved with ruthless efficiency, completely ignoring the panicked gasps of the Atlanta elite who had just watched a supposed real estate tycoon get exposed as a pathetic, desperate thief. Bradley stumbled forward as the lead agent pushed him toward the center aisle, his face completely devoid of color, his expensive suit suddenly looking like a cheap costume on a condemned man. The wealthy politicians and investors who had been sitting near him quickly pulled their chairs back, distancing themselves from the toxic fallout of his criminal arrest. They stared at him with unhidden disgust, whispering harshly to one another about the minority development funds he had shamelessly embezzled to pay for his fake luxury lifestyle. Bradley looked over his shoulder, his eyes wide and pleading desperately, searching for Chantel to do something, to scream for a lawyer or to defend his honor. But Chantel was completely consumed by her own catastrophic unraveling. Chantel was standing near the overturned chair, staring at the flashing red and blue police lights reflecting through the massive glass windows of the botanical gardens. Her entire identity, her entire fake wealthy existence was being dragged out the front door in handcuffs. She looked down at the cheap, ripped polyester of her rented designer dress, and then looked up at me standing flawlessly on the stage in my custom emerald Schiaparelli gown. The stark contrast between my absolute power and her total pathetic ruin finally broke the last remaining threads of her fragile narcissistic sanity. She let out a piercing, animalistic shriek that echoed violently against the crystal chandeliers. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated entitlement being violently crushed into dust. She grabbed a silver butter knife from the pristine white tablecloth of the nearest VIP table, wrapping her manicured fingers tightly around the handle like it was a deadly weapon. Her eyes were wide and frantic, filled with a lifetime of toxic jealousy and uncontrolled rage. "You ruined my life!" she screamed at the top of her lungs, her voice cracking hysterically as she lunged forward, pushing past the terrified guests and charging blindly toward the main stage. "You were supposed to be the failure. You were supposed to be nothing. You food truck trash. I am the golden child. I deserve that money. I deserve that power. You stole everything from me." She was running as fast as her cheap heels would carry her, completely blinded by her psychotic rage, but she had completely forgotten about the massive rip in the hem of her rented dress. The long torn fabric dragged beneath her feet, tangling dangerously around her high heels as she launched herself toward the steps of the stage. She stepped directly onto the torn polyester, her forward momentum violently pulling the fabric tight. The sound of the dress tearing was incredibly loud, ripping all the way up the back seam and destroying the garment entirely. Chantel lost her footing completely, her arms flailing wildly in the air as the butter knife flew out of her hand and clattered harmlessly against the polished marble floor. She crashed forward, landing face first onto the hard stone with a sickening thud, the cheap rented dress splitting wide open to reveal her basic undergarments to the entire room of billionaires and socialites. The private security detail I had hired moved with terrifying speed. Two massive guards in dark suits descended upon her, instantly pinning her thrashing body to the marble floor before she could even attempt to stand back up. They held her down effortlessly, treating the supposedly elite socialite exactly like the deranged criminal she was acting like. Chantel kicked and screamed, sobbing hysterically into the cold floor, beating her fists against the marble as the security guards placed zip ties around her wrists to prevent her from harming herself or anyone else. The elite crowd watched in absolute stunned horror, disgusted by the pathetic display of violence and jealousy radiating from my sister. She had wanted to be the center of attention at the most exclusive gala in Atlanta, and now she truly was pinned to the floor in a ruined rented dress, weeping like a spoiled child, while the entire high society of the city looked down on her with nothing but profound pity and contempt. Valerie and Desmond had remained completely frozen during Chantel's psychotic break, but seeing their golden child subdued by security finally snapped them out of their paralyzed state. They did not run to help Bradley, who was currently being loaded into the back of a federal vehicle outside. They did not try to comfort Chantel, who was screaming about how unfair her life was. Instead, my parents realized that their entire financial safety net had just been obliterated and their only remaining hope for survival was standing on the stage holding the executioner's axe. They scrambled out of their front row seats, pushing past the security guards who allowed them to approach the base of the stage. They looked like cornered rats, completely stripped of their usual arrogant country club superiority. Valerie rushed to the edge of the elevated platform, tears streaming down her face, ruining her heavy makeup and making dark mascara tracks down her cheeks. She reached her trembling hands upward toward me, her fingers grasping desperately at the empty air. Kiara, please, you have to stop this, she begged, her voice cracking with raw, genuine panic. We are your parents. We gave you life. We raised you. We fed you. You cannot do this to your own family. You cannot take our home away from us. We will have nowhere to go. We will be out on the street, Kiara. You have to call off the lawyers. You have to give us back our house. Desmond stood right beside her. His proud posture entirely collapsed. His shoulders slumped forward in total defeat. The man who had puffed his cigar and threatened to destroy me at the golf club just days ago was now weeping openly, looking up at me with terrified, desperate eyes. Kiara, my little girl, please listen to your mother, he pleaded, his voice shaking pathetically. I know we made some mistakes. I know we were harsh on you sometimes. But it was only to make you stronger, to build your character. You proved us wrong, you won. You are a billionaire. Now you have more money than you could ever spend. Please do not foreclose on the house. We will do anything you want. We will publicly apologize. We will make things right. Just please let us keep the house. Do not throw your own flesh and blood out into the streets. I stood at the crystal podium, looking down at the two people who had brought me into this world. I looked at their tear-stained faces, their trembling hands, their pathetic, desperate begging, and I searched my soul for even a single ounce of sympathy or hesitation. I looked for the small, scared child inside of me, who used to crave their love and approval, who used to cry when they chose Chantel over me. But that child was gone, completely burned away by years of emotional abuse, financial extortion, and ruthless cruelty. All that was left was the cold, untouchable chairwoman of K Holdings, a woman who understood that mercy given to a narcissist is nothing but an invitation for future betrayal. I felt absolutely nothing for them. No anger, no sadness, no guilt. Just the pristine, empty calm of total closure. I leaned slightly forward, bringing my face closer to the microphone so my voice would echo with crystal clarity across the massive, silent ballroom. I looked directly into my mother's panicked eyes and delivered the final, absolute blow. You do not seem to understand the reality of your situation, Valerie, I said, my voice devoid of any warmth or emotion. I did not pause the bank foreclosure. I bought the actual foreclosure notice, which means I am not a bank willing to negotiate terms or grant extensions. I am the sole owner of the property, and I want you off my land. You have exactly until 8 o'clock tomorrow morning to pack whatever cheap clothes you can fit into your suitcases and vacate my premises completely, any items left inside the house after 8 o'clock will be legally seized and thrown directly into the county landfill, right where your family legacy belongs. Desmond let out a loud, tragic sob, covering his face with his hands, as the absolute certainty of his homelessness crashed down upon his heavy shoulders. Valerie shook her head violently, refusing to accept the brutal truth. She kept reaching toward me, begging me to show mercy, crying about how they had no money and nowhere else to go. I suggest you start walking right now. I continued, my voice cutting through her hysterical sobbing. I hear Chantel's cramped rented apartment has a very comfortable couch. You can all squeeze in there while Bradley spends the next 7 years eating federal prison food. And if you start feeling too depressed about losing your elite country club status and your massive mansion, maybe you can pool whatever pocket change you have left and order yourselves some of those $185 butter poached lobsters to cheer yourselves up. Just make sure you remember to pack a Lunchable for the ride over, because no one here is paying your bill tonight. The memory of that seafood dinner, of them intentionally humiliating my beautiful 10-year-old daughter over a basket of cold bread, hung heavily in the air between us. Valerie's eyes widened as the sheer karmic poetry of my words finally hit her. She realized in that devastating moment that the very cruelty she had proudly displayed at that restaurant had directly sealed her ultimate destruction. She had signed her own eviction notice. Noticed the moment she told me to feed my daughter scraps while they feasted like royalty. They had dug their own graves, and I was simply throwing the dirt over their heads. I took a step back from the podium, smoothing the heavy emerald silk of my $40,000 gown. I did not offer them another glance. I turned my back completely on Valerie and Desmond, leaving them weeping and collapsing onto the polished marble floor of the grand ballroom. Chantel was still sobbing as the security guards dragged her ripped rented dress toward the service exit. Her fake wealthy life completely eradicated. The total annihilation of their toxic family unit was finally achieved, leaving nothing but absolute wreckage in my wake. As I began to walk gracefully across the stage toward the private exit, an incredible sound began to rise from the darkened ballroom. It started as a slow, deliberate clapping from one of the most powerful real estate tycoons in the city, sitting in the second row. Within seconds, the clapping spread, rippling rapidly through the crowd of elite investors, politicians, and business leaders. They stood up from their tables one by one until the entire grand ballroom was on its feet, giving me a massive, deafening standing ovation. They were not clapping out of polite social obligation. They were clapping out of deep, profound respect for the absolute ruthless precision with which I had dismantled the fraudsters who had tried to infiltrate their ranks. They recognized true power when they saw it, and they were bowing to the new queen of Atlanta high society. I did not wave or smile. I simply kept my head held high, my posture radiating absolute, untouchable dominance, as I glided off the stage and walked down the private carpeted hallway toward my waiting Maybach. The heavy bass of the applause faded behind the thick velvet curtains, leaving me in the quiet, peaceful serenity of my own incredible triumph. The heavy chains of generational trauma, financial abuse, and narcissistic manipulation had been completely shattered tonight. I had walked into that gala as a target, and I was walking out as a legend, leaving my family to drown in the shallow, toxic puddle they had created for themselves. The air outside the botanical gardens felt remarkably crisp and clean. As my driver opened the heavy armored door of my vehicle, I slipped into the plush leather back seat, feeling lighter than I had ever felt in my entire 34 years of existence. The execution was over. The rot had been surgically removed from my life, and my empire was finally completely, entirely my own to enjoy forevermore. 6 months have passed since that spectacular night at the Botanical Gardens, and the dust has finally settled over the Atlanta elite society. I am sitting in my sun-drenched penthouse office on the top floor of my corporate headquarters, looking out through the floor-to-ceiling glass windows. The sweeping skyline of the city stretches out beautifully before me, bathed in the warm golden light of the early afternoon. The heavy burden of my past is gone. Camille, my brilliant attorney, walks into the quiet room, her heels clicking softly against the polished hardwood floor. She does not say a single word at first, simply sliding a thick manila folder across my sleek modern desk. The final legal paperwork is completely finished. The hostile takeover is officially closed out, and the lingering ghosts of my extremely toxic family have been permanently legally exorcised from my entire life, creating a profound sense of absolute peace. Camille sits gracefully in the luxurious leather chair opposite me, giving me the final highly anticipated updates on the miserable people who foolishly tried to destroy us. Bradley did not stand a chance against the ruthless federal investigators and the mountain of financial evidence we provided to them. He quickly pleaded guilty to multiple federal counts of wire fraud and gross embezzlement, avoiding a lengthy public trial. He is currently serving a 7-year sentence in a federal penitentiary. Far away from the fancy luxury cars and expensive country clubs he used to worship every single day, his fake business empire collapsed overnight, leaving him with absolutely nothing to his name. Chantel was forced to file for total financial bankruptcy. All her maxed-out credit cards were immediately frozen, and her rented upper-class lifestyle was violently repossessed by creditors to pay off her massive mounting debts. She is now working the afternoon drive-through shift at a local fast food chain, which ironically enough happens to be owned by a quiet subsidiary of my holding company. She spends her long, miserable days handing out greasy paper bags through a window, wearing a cheap polyester uniform, completely stripped of the fake elite status she once guarded so fiercely and desperately. Valerie and Desmond were officially permanently evicted from the massive, sprawling estate I purchased right out from under them. They now live in a tiny, cramped one-bedroom apartment on the far industrial outskirts of the city. They have been officially permanently blacklisted from every single elite country club, networking event, and high society organization in the entire state of Georgia. Their days are now spent hopelessly trapped in that small, hot apartment, bitterly arguing and relentlessly blaming each other for losing the ultimate golden goose they foolishly threw away. They have absolutely no money, no social status, and absolutely no friends left to call upon in their time of absolute desperate need. Their downfall is entirely complete. I sign the final legal documents, handing them back to Camille with a deep, profound sense of ultimate closure. I grab my car keys and take the private executive elevator down to the secure underground parking garage, climbing into my vehicle and pulling out into the beautiful, bustling Atlanta afternoon. My heart feels incredibly light today, completely free from the heavy, suffocating burden of trying to constantly earn the love and respect of people who were completely emotionally incapable of giving it to me. I drive smoothly through the quiet, upscale, tree-lined streets, pulling up to the circular drop-off driveway of Zuri Exclusive Private Academy. The final school bell rings, echoing clearly across the campus, and I watch my beautiful, highly intelligent 10-year-old daughter run out of the heavy oak doors, her sweet face lighting up brilliantly, the exact moment she sees my car waiting for her. She opens the passenger door and slides happily into the comfortable leather seat, dropping her heavy textbook-filled backpack onto the floorboard. She is practically vibrating with pure, innocent excitement, holding up a crisp white piece of paper proudly in her right hand. It is her final academic report card, showing a perfect, flawless row of top grades, reflecting her brilliant young mind and her absolutely unbreakable spirit, despite everything we went through together. Mom, can we go out for a special dinner tonight to celebrate my perfect grades? Zuri asks, her big, beautiful brown eyes looking at me with pure, unconditional love and absolute trust. I look over at my incredible daughter, feeling a genuine, warm, gentle smile spread widely across my face, entirely free from the dark, exhausting toxicity of my past. Anything you want in the world, baby, I tell her softly, pulling the car smoothly away from the curb and merging into the light afternoon traffic. We can go anywhere in the entire city to celebrate you tonight except for lobster. I think we are both completely tired of eating lobster forever. Zuri throws her head back and laughs, a bright, beautiful musical sound that entirely fills the quiet cabin of the car as we drive happily forward into the golden evening sunset. Sometimes the only possible way to truly heal from a toxic, abusive family is to surgically, permanently remove them from your entire life. Never let anyone serve you cold, hard breadcrumbs and try to convince you. It is a massive, luxurious feast. If you deeply enjoyed my personal story of reclaiming my ultimate power and destroying the people who tried to ruin me, let me know your thoughts in the comments section below. Stay incredibly strong, always trust your own worth, and remember to keep building your beautiful, massive empires in absolute, complete, and total silence. Thank you so much for watching and listening to my journey today. I hope it brings you peace and the immense courage you might desperately need to face your own difficult battles. Until next time, take care of yourselves and never ever let anyone dim your bright, shining, beautiful light. Goodbye for now. The ultimate lesson from this journey is that true power does not come from seeking validation from those who are determined to misunderstand you. It comes from walking away from the table when the only things being served are disrespect and breadcrumbs. We often stay in toxic family dynamics because society tells us that blood is thicker than water, but shared DNA does not give anyone a free pass to exploit your name, steal your future, or treat you like a second-class citizen. Healing begins the exact moment you stop trying to fix broken people and start focusing entirely on building your own impenetrable empire setting. Ruthless boundaries is not an act of cruelty. It is the highest form of self-love and preservation. You have to be willing to burn down the fake illusions to construct a reality where you are truly respected. Your success will always be the loudest response to their doubt, and the ultimate revenge is simply living a brilliant, peaceful life, entirely out of their reach if you are ready to stop accepting less than you deserve and start claiming your power. Let me know your thoughts right down in the comments section below.